Hey everyone, and welcome back to History Simplified. Today we're talking about that time when the British Empire, the undisputed heavyweight champion of colonialism, decided to break up with its most famous, most complicated, and most valuable partner, India. Think of it as the world's worst divorce orchestrated by a lawyer who was given the wrong address and a deadline of yesterday. The resulting custody battle over the kids, in this case several hundred million people, and a landmass the size of a continent, got messy. Incredibly, catastrophically messy. Now, a serious historian might say this is a gross oversimplification of complex geopolitical, social, and religious factors, and they would be absolutely right. But they're also not as fun at parties, so we're sticking with our version. Before the inevitable betrayal and baffling map drawing starts, if you enjoy this highly inaccurate but fun version of history, please hit that like and subscribe button. Seriously, it helps us buy more silly hats for the next video. Alright, grab some popcorn. Things are about to get unnecessarily complicated. Our story begins in 1945. The world has just survived the biggest, baddest bar brawl in history, World War II. And standing in the middle of the wreckage, looking vaguely victorious but mostly just dazed, is Great Britain. On the outside, it's all stiff upper lip and victory parades. The lion is still roaring, the Union Jack is still flying over a quarter of the planet, and the tea is still being brewed with militant precision. But if you were to peek into Britain's wallet, you'd find a few lint-covered coins, a picture of the Queen looking worried, and an IOU to the United States for a sum of money so large it could only be written in scientific notation. Britain was, to put it mildly, spectacularly broke. The country that had once bankrolled global trade and funded massive armies was now rationing bread and figuring out how to rebuild London with what was essentially spare change. This presented a tiny problem for the whole empire business. You see, running an empire is expensive. It's like having a subscription to every streaming service, but instead of shows, you get massive territories full of people who are increasingly annoyed that you're there. The jewel in this very expensive, very demanding crown was, of course, India. For centuries, India was Britain's cash cow, its status symbol, its glittering centerpiece. It was the ultimate colonial prize. But by 1945, it was less of a prize and more of a massive throbbing headache. The Indian independence movement had been gaining steam for decades, and managing the place required a colossal amount of money, administrators, and soldiers. All things Britain was suddenly very short on. The grand imperial project was starting to look like a disastrously underwater mortgage on a house whose occupants were actively trying to kick you out. Imagine Britain as an old aristocrat who's just lost everything at the casino. He still wears the top hat and monocle, but he's secretly eating canned beans for dinner. He strolls through his gigantic, crumbling mansion, the Empire, and every creak in the floorboard sounds like a bill he can't pay. Australia and Canada are the kids who've moved out and only call on holidays. Some African colonies are the distant cousins he barely remembers he's responsible for. But India? India is the grand ballroom. It's magnificent, but the chandeliers are flickering, the plumbing is shot, and the tenants, all 400 million of them, are starting a riot in the main hall over who gets to control the thermostat. The cost of just keeping the lights on was becoming astronomical. The war had not only drained Britain's treasury, it had also shattered the illusion of British invincibility. Indian soldiers had fought bravely for the empire, and they came home not with a sense of loyalty, but with the burning question: if we can fight for freedom in Europe, why can't we have it at home? This awkward financial situation was made even more awkward by the new landlord of the free world, the United States. America, bursting with cash and post-war confidence, looked at Britain's old-fashioned empire with a mixture of pity and disdain. It was the cool tech billionaire looking at a dusty old monarchy. The conversation probably went something like this: personified dialogue America, slapping Britain on the back a little too hard. Say, "Britain, old boy, heck of a scrap that was. Glad we could help you out. By the way, that reminds me about that little loan. And also this whole ruling the waves and subject peoples thing. It's not polling well. Kinda has a funky anti-democratic vibe, you know? The future is freedom, baseball, and, markets that are open to everyone, especially us. Britain, adjusting its monocle, trying to maintain an air of dignity. My dear chap, it is a matter of civilizing tradition and global stability. One cannot simply abandon one's responsibilities. It is the white man's burden. America. Yeah, looks more like the broke man's burden from over here. Listen, just wrap it up, will you? It's making everyone uncomfortable. And seriously about that money. So Britain was stuck. It was broke, it was tired, and its main creditor was telling it to ditch the whole colonial shtick. The romantic ideal of the British Raj with its pith-helmeted governors and grand durbars was colliding with the cold, hard reality of a balance sheet that was bleeding red ink. The decision to leave India wasn't born from a sudden enlightened vision of universal liberty. Oh no, that would be far too noble. It was the resigned sigh of an empire that could no longer afford its own grandeur. And here's the most beautifully ironic part of this whole setup. Our first meta-commentary of the series. The entity that had built its wealth on the systematic, centuries-long extraction of resources from India was now leaving because it was too poor to stay. It was the galactic empire equivalent of looking at your credit card statement after a long weekend on Coruscant and realizing you can't afford your Star Destroyer SS monthly payments anymore. The departure wasn't a gift, it was a liquidation sale. Britain was closing up shop, and it was about to do it with all the grace and careful planning of a fired employee stuffing office supplies into a box while shouting, "You can't fire me, I quit." This desperate need to just get out as quickly and cheaply as possible would inform every single catastrophic decision that was to come. Britain wasn't thinking about a stable future for India, it was thinking about stopping the financial bleeding. And as they prepared to pack their bags, back in the grand, chaotic ballroom, the two main tenants were already drawing up their own, very different, plans for the building's future. So, while Britain is upstairs frantically stuffing silverware into its suitcases and trying to figure out how to cancel its imperial cable subscription without paying a penalty, the real drama is unfolding downstairs. In the grand, chaotic ballroom of India, our two main tenants are having a slight disagreement. A disagreement about the future, about power, and fundamentally, about whether they can even stand to be in the same house once the landlord finally leaves. Think of them as the two loudest roommates in the world's most crowded and politically charged apartment. On one side, we have the Indian National Congress. On the other, the All India Muslim League. And they are not getting along. First up, the Indian National Congress. Let's call them Congress for short. Congress is the older roommate. It's been around since 1885, back when the British thought giving Indians a polite debating society was a cute way to let them blow off steam. Big mistake. Over the decades, Congress had grown from a polite club of Western-educated Indian gentlemen into a massive, sprawling, nationwide movement hell-bent on one thing: getting Britain out. Adios. Au revoir. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. Congress saw itself as the voice of all of India. It was, in its own mind, the government in waiting. Its entire identity was built on the idea of a single, unified, secular India. One nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You get the picture. Its membership was huge and diverse, including people from every religion and caste. However, and this is a huge however, its leadership was overwhelmingly Hindu. This wasn't necessarily out of malice. It was just a reflection of the demographic reality of India. But it created a perception problem. The face of this party for everyone looked suspiciously like a party for the Hindu majority. The star of the show was Jawaharlal Nehru, a man so charismatic, well-educated, and devastatingly handsome, he could probably charm a snake into tying itself into a decorative knot. He was the intellectual heir to the movement, a socialist, a secularist, and a man who believed with every fiber of his being in the beautiful utopian dream of a united India, where religious differences would simply melt away in the warm glow of shared nationhood. To him, any talk of division was not just wrong, it was a betrayal of the very soul of the independence movement. Congress's position was simple. We represent everyone. Once the British are gone, we'll hold elections, run the country as one big happy democratic family, and everything will be fine. Trust us. Now, standing in the other corner of the room, looking deeply skeptical and lighting a cigarette with disdain, is the Muslim League. The League is the younger, more cynical roommate. It had also been around for a while since 1906, but for most of its life, it was a relatively minor player. Its original goal was just to make sure the Muslim minority got a fair shake. Better representation, protection for their culture, that sort of thing. But as the prospect of British departure became real, the League's anxiety levels went through the roof. They looked at Congress with its sea of Hindu leaders and voters and did some simple math. In a united democratic India, Muslims would make up about 25% of the population. This meant they could, theoretically, be outvoted on every single issue, forever. The big happy family Congress was promising sounded to the League an awful lot like a family, where the big brother gets to decide everything from what's on TV to what's for dinner, and the little brother just has to lump it. Their fears weren't entirely unfounded. Decades of British divide and rule policies had already created deep fissures between Hindu and Muslim communities. The League began to argue that Muslims weren't just a minority, they were a separate nation altogether, a nation that deserved its own state. This idea, the two-nation theory, became their entire platform, and the man who became its unshakable, brilliantly articulate, and utterly stubborn champion was Muhammad Ali Jinnah. If Nehru was the charming idealist, Jinnah was the razor-sharp lawyer. Impeccably dressed in Savile Row suits, Jinnah was pragmatic, logical, and had zero time for what he saw as Congress's vague, sentimental nonsense about unity. He had once been a member of Congress, a believer in Hindu-Muslim cooperation, but he'd become completely disillusioned, convinced that Congress would never treat Muslims as true equals. The League's position, under Jinnah, became equally simple. We don't trust you. Your unity is a code word for assimilation. Then we want our own country, a homeland for the Muslims of the subcontinent. We want Pakistan. This fundamental clash of visions, one united India versus two separate nations, led to a political stalemate so complete it was almost performance art. Imagine them trying to plan for the future. Personified dialogue Congress, beaming arm outstretched. My friend, the day of freedom is nearly upon us. Together, we shall build a glorious, secular nation for all Indians. Muslim League takes a slow drag from his cigarette, completely unmoved. Define together, and define all Indians. Because from where I'm standing, your idea of together involves my people being a permanent, politically irrelevant minority in a country run by you. I've seen this movie. I know how it ends. Congress. But we promise to be fair. We'll have protections for minorities written into the Constitution. Muslim League. Ah, yes. Promises. The same kind of promises you made during the provincial elections in '37, after which you promptly formed governments without us and started pushing your own cultural agenda. Forgive me if I don't frame that promise and hang it on my wall. We're not asking for a seat at your table. We're demanding our own table in our own house. Congress, this is madness. You're breaking our motherland apart because of this paranoia. Muslim League. You call it paranoia, I call it foresight. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting with my cartographer. And this is the heartbreaking core of the whole mess. This is the meta-commentary moment where you just want to shake both of them. They were both fighting for freedom from the same oppressor. They both had brilliant, dedicated leaders who genuinely wanted what they thought was best for their people. But the trust between them had been so utterly poisoned by history, by politics, and most definitely by decades of Britain poking and prodding at their divisions, that they couldn't see any common ground. They were talking past each other, locked in a zero-sum game. Congress saw the League's demand as a dagger aimed at the heart of India. The League saw Congress's offer of unity as a beautifully wrapped box with a Trojan horse inside. Any proposal for a united India with strong minority rights was seen by Congress as a step toward division. Any proposal for a centralized government was seen by the League as a trap. The House was deadlocked. And as Britain grew ever more impatient to leave, the argument between its two main tenants was about to get a whole lot louder and a whole lot more dangerous. So the House is in deadlock. The two main tenants, Congress and the Muslim League, are in a permanent standoff, communicating only through passive-aggressive notes slipped under the door. To understand why they just couldn't find a middle ground, you have to look at the two men who had become the living, breathing embodiments of their clashing worldviews. This wasn't just a political disagreement anymore. It was a deeply personal, philosophical duel between two of the 20th century's most formidable personalities. It was the saint versus the skeptic. In the corner of unity, we have Mahatma Gandhi. And look, calling Gandhi a politician is like calling a hurricane a bit of weather. He operated on a completely different level. This was the guy who could start a movement that would rattle the foundations of the British Empire by, and I am not making this up, walking to the sea to illegally make salt. He was a force of nature, wrapped in a humble cotton dhoti. His entire being was geared toward one beautiful, transcendent idea, that India was a single spiritual entity. For him, the bond between Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, and everyone else wasn't just a political convenience, it was a sacred truth. His vision for a free India was a tapestry woven from these different threads. To even talk about cutting that tapestry in half was, in his eyes, a violent, blasphemous act. It was a vivisection of the motherland. His methods were as unique as his vision. While other leaders gave speeches from podiums, Gandhi led by example, living a life of ascetic simplicity. He championed nonviolent resistance, satyagraha or truth force, a concept so powerfully radical it made seasoned British viceroys, men who had commanded armies, utterly bewildered. How do you fight an enemy who refuses to fight back, who just sits there peacefully and takes a beating until your own conscience makes you stop? He was, in essence, the nation's soul. But here's the catch with being the soul of the nation. You tend to think in spiritual, absolute terms. For Gandhi, compromise on the issue of unity was impossible. It wasn't a negotiation point, it was a moral bedrock. He was the heartbroken father of the family, pleading with his children not to fight, convinced that if they all just loved each other enough, everything would work out. Now walk across the room, past the idealists and the dreamers, and you'll find Muhammad Ali Jinnah, leaning against the wall, radiating an aura of impeccable tailoring and profound skepticism. If Gandhi was the saint, Jinnah was the skeptic in chief. And the irony here is so thick you could cut it with a knife. Jinnah, the man who would become the founder of a nation created in the name of Islam, was personally about as secular as they come. He was a brilliant British-trained lawyer who loved his Savile Row suits, his cigars, and a cheeky glass of whiskey. He rarely even spoke Urdu, preferring the crisp English of the courtroom. While Gandhi looked like a prophet, Jinnah looked like he was about to foreclose on a prophet's ashram. He was not a man for mass movements or spiritual appeals. He was a constitutionalist, a logician. His weapon of choice wasn't a prayer, it was a perfectly crafted legal argument. Jinnah had spent years watching the political game unfold, and he was utterly convinced that in the democratic structure Congress envisioned, Muslims would be permanently sidelined. He didn't trust emotional appeals or vague promises of brotherhood. He wanted cold, hard, legal guarantees. His logic was relentless. The only way to protect the Muslim minority from being swamped by the Hindu majority was to give them a separate political entity, where they would be the majority, a fortress of their own. It wasn't born from a deep well of religious piety, but from a cold calculation of political power. He was the ultimate divorce attorney, looking at a failing marriage and saying, "Feelings are irrelevant. We need to divide the assets, draw a line, and let both parties move on with their lives. It will be less painful in the long run." When these two men met, it was like a conversation between a poet and an accountant. They were speaking fundamentally different languages, and their famous talks were a masterclass in mutual frustration. Personified dialogue. Gandhi, spinning a cotton wheel, his voice gentle but firm. "Jinnah, my brother, I beg you, reconsider this path. To divide India is to cut our mother in two. How can you commit such a sin against her? We are all her children, Hindu and Muslim alike." Jinnah stubs out his cigarette, his voice sharp and precise. "Mahatma, your metaphors are poetic, but they are not a substitute for a constitution. I am not interested in sin, I am interested in seats in a legislature. I am interested in the allocation of state resources. Your mother has 300 million Hindu children and 100 million Muslim children. You tell me how the inheritance gets divided fairly when one group has 3 times the votes of the other. It is simple, brutal arithmetic. Gandhi. But our hearts can be united. We can live in brotherhood. Trust is the answer. Jinnah. A dry, humorless chuckle. Trust? I trusted the Congress in 1937. The result was provincial governments that might as well have been designated Hindus only. Trust is a sentiment. I require a sovereign state, a territory. We are not a minority. We are a nation. And a nation requires a homeland. And isn't that just the most tragic, face-palmingly frustrating part of this whole saga? It's the ultimate meta-commentary on the failure of communication. You had 2 titans, 2 absolute giants of their time, who were just wired differently. They were operating on completely separate frequencies. Gandhi was trying to solve a spiritual problem, appealing to conscience and shared humanity. Jinnah was trying to solve a political problem, demanding concrete power and legal safeguards. Gandhi was playing chess with the cosmos. Jinnah was playing poker with the British Empire, and he had a fantastic poker face. They were 2 trains on parallel tracks speeding toward the same station, independents but utterly incapable of ever meeting. The British, of course, were watching this from the sidelines, their initial strategy of divide and rule having worked a little too well. It was like they'd spent years encouraging their 2 kids to compete, only to act shocked when the kids refused to share their toys. With the saint and the skeptic locked in their intractable duel, any hope for a simple, elegant solution was evaporating. And Britain's patience was about to run out completely. So we have our saint and our skeptic locked in a philosophical death match, unable to agree on the fundamental nature of reality, let alone a power-sharing formula. The political machinery of India has ground to a complete halt, and Britain, the landlord who is now desperately trying to sell the house before the foundation cracks completely, decides it's time for one last, heroic, and utterly doomed attempt to fix everything. Enter the cabinet mission of 1946. This wasn't just a committee. This was Britain's A-team, a trio of high-ranking ministers flown in from London with a singular, impossible mission: to broker a deal for a united, independent India. They arrived in Delhi in the blistering heat of March, full of that classic British confidence, ready to apply some sensible, logical tea-powered diplomacy and sort this whole messy business out once and for all. What they came up with was, and I say this with awe, one of the most gloriously, breathtakingly complicated constitutional proposals ever devised by the human mind. The cabinet mission plan was not a simple solution. Oh no. It was a political Rube Goldberg machine. It was the IKEA flat-pack furniture of statecraft. It looked vaguely plausible on the box, but the instructions were in gibberish and you were guaranteed to have leftover pieces and a wobbly final product. The goal was to create something that both Congress and the Muslim League could, in theory, say yes to, even if they had no idea what they were actually agreeing to. It was a masterpiece of trying to be all things to all people, which is a guaranteed way to be nothing to anyone. Let's use our house analogy to break this monstrosity down. The plan proposed a 3-tiered India. At the very top, Tier 1, you'd have the All India Union. This would be the central government for the whole house. But, and it's a big but, it would be incredibly weak. Like, can't lift a bag of groceries weak. This central government would only control 3 things: defense, locking the front door; foreign affairs, deciding who to invite over for dinner; and communications, managing the house's Wi-Fi. That's it. Everything else, the budget, the laws, the interior decorating, was out of its hands. This was the bone thrown to the Muslim League, who were terrified of a strong Hindu-dominated center. Then came Tier 2, the weirdest part. The plan said that all the different provinces of India, the individual rooms of the house, would have to join one of 3 large groups, which were basically different wings of the mansion. Group A was the massive Hindu-majority heartland. Group B was the Muslim-majority provinces in the northwest like Punjab and Sindh. Group C was the Muslim-majority provinces in the northeast, Bengal and Assam. Each of these groups could form their own mini-governments and write their own constitutions. This was Jinnah's prize. He looked at groups B and C and saw the clear outline of a future Pakistan, east and west. Finally, at the bottom, Tier 3, were the individual provinces, the rooms themselves, which would handle their own local stuff. And here was the cherry on top of this very confusing cake. The plan included an opt-out clause. After 10 years, any of the three groups could just vote to leave the entire Indian Union. It was a prenuptial agreement with a 10-year divorce countdown baked right in. The British ministers, immensely proud of their convoluted creation, presented it to the Indian leaders with a flourish. Personified Dialogue Britain, the cabinet mission, unrolling a massive, confusing blueprint. Gentlemen, behold, the solution. It is unity and division, together at last. Mr. Nehru, you get your single united India, see? It says All India Union right here at the top. And Mr. Jinnah, you get your autonomy. See? Groups B and C can essentially run themselves and, winks conspiratorially. Reevaluate the living situation in a decade. It's genius, everyone wins. Jinnah, Muslim League, squinting at the fine print. So, to be clear, the central government has virtually no power, and my groups can vote to secede and form Pakistan after 10 years. It's a bit convoluted, but it gets me what I want in the end. It's a stepping stone. Very well, the Muslim League accepts. Nehru, Congress, staring at the blueprint in horror. Hold on a minute. You're forcing provinces into these groups? A province like Assam, which has a Congress government, has to be lumped into Group C with Bengal? And the center is this pathetic, toothless entity? And they can just leave? This isn't a blueprint for a nation. It's a 3-stage demolition plan. We accept the general framework, but we will not be bound by this compulsory grouping nonsense. We'll join the government-making process, but we fully intend to modify this plan later. And right there, the entire thing fell apart. It was the ultimate group project failure. Both sides said yes, but they were agreeing to two completely different documents that existed only in their heads. The League accepted it because they saw it as a guaranteed, legally enshrined pathway to Pakistan. Congress accepted it because they saw it as a temporary annoyance they could dismantle once they were in power, creating the strong, centralized, united India they'd always wanted. The whole deal was held together by semantic chewing gum and wishful thinking. The final blow came in July 1946 when Nehru, in a moment of disastrous candor, held a press conference and basically said out loud what Congress was thinking, that they were not bound by the details of the plan. For Jinnah, this was the ultimate betrayal, the smoking gun he'd been waiting for. He immediately declared that Congress had revealed its true tyrannical intentions. They had negotiated in bad faith. He rescinded the Muslim League's acceptance of the plan and announced that the dream of a peaceful, constitutional settlement was dead. It was now clear, he declared, that the only way to achieve Pakistan was through other means. Let's be honest for a moment. Our meta-commentary is this. The cabinet mission plan was a political unicorn, a mythical beast that sounded lovely in theory but couldn't exist in the real world. It was an attempt to solve an emotional, centuries-old problem of trust and identity with a bureaucratic flowchart. It was like trying to fix a crumbling marriage by suggesting the couple share a house, but communicate only via memos and have a legally binding contract that allows one of them to dynamite the garage in 10 years. It wasn't a plan for unity. It was a blueprint for a delayed action explosion. And with its failure, the timer on that explosion was just set to go off a whole lot sooner than anyone thought. The cabinet mission, Britain's fantastically complex blueprint for a united India, has crashed and burned. Jinnah, feeling utterly betrayed by Nehru's public dismissal of the plan's core tenets, has stormed out of the negotiations. The door to a peaceful constitutional settlement has been slammed shut, locked, and possibly set on fire. So, Jinnah and the Muslim League decide they are done talking. The time for polite debate, for legal arguments, for trying to persuade Congress and the British through reason, is over. He declares that the Muslim League is unleashing the tiger. On August 16, 1946, they would observe Direct Action Day. Now, direct action is one of those wonderfully, terrifyingly vague political phrases. What did it actually mean? Jinnah himself was maddeningly opaque. To his more moderate followers, it meant a day of peaceful protest, strikes, marches, public meetings to demonstrate the unwavering and widespread demand for Pakistan. A show of political muscle, not a call to arms. But to his more radical followers, and to the millions of anxious people living in the tense, simmering cities of India, it sounded a lot more like a green light. It was a signal that the gloves were off. The ambiguity was the point. It was a political dog whistle blown so loudly that everyone could hear it, but everyone heard a slightly different tune. It was like Jinnah had walked into a warehouse packed to the rafters with dynamite and casually announced, "Today we're going to conduct a series of experiments with matches, for political reasons." The city that would become the epicenter of this experiment was Calcutta, now Kolkata. Calcutta in 1946 was a powder keg waiting for a spark. It was a massive, overcrowded, and deeply divided city. It had a Hindu majority, but also one of the largest urban Muslim populations in the world. Tensions between the two communities had been simmering for years, a toxic brew of economic rivalry, political competition, and religious friction. But here's the crucial detail, the detail that turned a potential disaster into an absolute catastrophe. The government of Bengal province was controlled by the Muslim League. The man in charge, the premier, was a League politician named Hussain Shahid Suhrawardi. This meant that on a day the Muslim League had called for direct action, the police force of Calcutta was under the command of a Muslim League government. The referees for the match were wearing one of the team's jerseys. On the morning of August 16th, the city held its breath. Processions of League supporters began to march. At first it was just politics as usual, shouting slogans, waving flags, but then somewhere a stone was thrown. An argument escalated. A shop was looted, and the spark hit the powder keg. All the pent-up fear, hatred, and anxiety of the past decades exploded into open warfare on the streets. This was the moment the roommates stopped writing angry notes about the shared bathroom and started trying to burn each other's beds. The passive aggression was over. This was active, brutal, and horrifyingly real. For 3 solid days, Calcutta descended into a medieval nightmare. Law and order didn't just break down, it evaporated. Mobs, organized and armed with knives, clubs, and anything they could find, roamed the streets, hunting people from the rival community. The city's intricate network of narrow lanes and slums became killing fields. The police were either nowhere to be seen, hopelessly outnumbered, or in some documented cases, actively participating on the side of their co-religionists. When the smoke finally cleared and a semblance of order was restored by the army, the scale of the horror was revealed. The estimates vary, but it's believed that somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 people were killed in what became known as the Great Calcutta Killings, or the Week of the Long Knives. Tens of thousands more were injured, and over 100,000 were left homeless. The political fallout was immediate and venomous. The blame game started before the bodies were even counted. Personified dialogue Congress, Gandhi and Nehru aghast. "My God, Jinnah, look what your direct action has wrought. This is not a political statement. This is a massacre. You called for this. This blood is on your hands." Muslim League, Jinnah defiant. "My hands? This is the consequence of your tyranny. This is what happens when you attempt to crush the aspirations of 100 million people under the boot of a Hindu majority. You drove us to this by your refusal to negotiate in good faith. And where was the Viceroy? Where was the great British Raj while a major city burned? Britain, Viceroy Wavell from his palace." Sounding flustered over the phone. "Yes, quite a nasty business. Dreadful. We are, monitoring the situation very closely. We've sent a strongly worded memo urging for calm. We implore both sides to, stop it. This is making a frightful mess of the quarterly reports. And this is our grim meta-commentary for the day. The Great Calcutta Killings were the full stop at the end of the long, painful sentence that was the debate over a united India. All the eloquent speeches, all the intricate constitutional plans, all the talk of shared history and secular ideals, they all went up in the smoke rising from the burning slums of Calcutta. The violence was the bloody, screaming, irrefutable argument that the center could not hold. Partition was no longer just Jinnah's political demand. It had transformed into a desperate, terrifying necessity for millions of people who now believed it was the only way to survive. The violence didn't stay in Calcutta. It was a contagion. It spread like wildfire, sparking revenge killings in Bihar against Muslims, and then counter-revenge killings in Noakhali against Hindus. A horrifying cycle of tit-for-tat slaughter began to spin out of control across northern India. Back in London, the new Prime Minister, Clement Attlee, looked at the telex reports detailing the carnage and realized the game had changed. The British Empire wasn't presiding over a peaceful transfer of power anymore. It was sitting on top of a volcano that was actively erupting. The man in charge, Viceroy Wavell, a decent but unimaginative general, was clearly out of his depth. This wasn't a military problem, it was a political inferno. Attlee realized he needed someone new, someone decisive, someone with enough charisma, clout, and sheer bloody-mindedness to end this one way or another, and get Britain out before the whole subcontinent burned down around them. Back in London at 10 Downing Street, Prime Minister Clement Attlee is having a very, very bad day. The telex machine is chattering away, spitting out page after page of horror from India. Calcutta, Bihar, Noakhali, the names have become shorthand for sectarian carnage. The Great Calcutta Killings weren't an isolated incident. They were the opening act for a nationwide tour of communal violence. The British Empire, which had for so long prided itself on bringing order and law to the subcontinent, was now presiding over its bloody disintegration. Attlee's new Labour government, which had swept into power promising a brighter socialist post-war future, was now stuck managing a crisis that was draining money, manpower, and morale from an already shattered nation. India had officially moved from the headache column on the imperial balance sheet to the 5-alarm fire that is also a sucking chest wound column. Attlee was a man temperamentally unsuited for this kind of technicolor chaos. He wasn't a grand orator like his predecessor Winston Churchill, who probably would have given a rousing speech about fighting them on the beaches of Bengal. Attlee was a quiet, pragmatic, and deeply serious man. He was the sensible accountant who had taken over from the flamboyant cigar-chomping CEO, and upon opening the books had discovered the company was not only broke, but also embroiled in several dozen international lawsuits and was currently on fire. His analysis of the India situation was cold and logical. This is no longer profitable, this is no longer tenable, and this is no longer our problem to solve. The new government policy wasn't about a graceful, carefully managed transition of power anymore. The new policy was, get out now. The first step was to fire the guy currently in charge. The Viceroy, Lord Wavell, had to go. Now Wavell was a good man, an honorable man, a competent general who had served the empire his whole life. But he was a soldier, used to chains of command and orderly plans. He was trying to solve this raging political inferno by holding committee meetings. He was the sturdy, reliable mechanic trying to perform open-heart surgery with a wrench and a user manual. Every proposal he put forward was shot down by either Congress or the League. Every conference he called ended in a stalemate. He was a man of integrity and patience, and he was dealing with a situation that required a man of ruthless speed and almost messianic self-confidence. Attlee knew he needed to replace the mechanic with a rock-star surgeon. So the search began for a new viceroy, a final viceroy. This couldn't be just another colonial administrator from the usual stuffy production line. No, this job required a special set of skills. They needed someone who could walk into the most toxic negotiation on earth and charm everyone into submission. They needed someone with the authority to make snap decisions and the ego to believe those decisions were infallible. They needed a diplomat, a warrior, a showman, and a liquidator all rolled into one. They didn't just need a new viceroy, they needed a breakup czar. Someone to go in, manage the divorce, divide the assets, and get the hell out of Dodge before the alimony payments came due. And in the whole of the British Empire, there was really only one name with the right combination of stardust, status, and sheer, unadulterated audacity for the job: Lord Mountbatten. Dickie, as he was known to his friends, was basically a character from a movie. He was dashingly handsome. He was a genuine war hero, having served as the Supreme Allied Commander of the Southeast Asia Command. And most importantly, he was a royal. The king's own cousin. He dripped with glamour and prestige. He was the kind of man who could wear a white naval uniform covered in medals and not look ridiculous. Mountbatten was blessed with superhuman reserves of charm and a level of self-belief so high it could be seen from space. He was convinced he could solve any problem, win any argument, and succeed at any task, simply by being himself. He was the A-list celebrity brought in to rescue a failing blockbuster, the star quarterback sent in for the final game-winning play. The job offer, when it came, was essentially a suicide mission, and the conversation between the quiet prime minister and the glamorous royal probably went something like this. Personified dialogue. Attlee, looking exhausted, pushing a pile of grim reports across his desk. Dickie, I won't lie to you, India is a catastrophe. It's all going to hell in a handbasket and we're holding the basket. I need you to go out there as the last viceroy. Your job is not to govern India. Your job is to give it away. End the Raj. Get us out. And do it before the whole thing blows up in our faces. Mountbatten, casually inspecting his fingernails. A historic challenge. I like it. But Clem, if I'm to do this, I do it my way. I'll need plenipotentiary powers, full authority. No meddling from your ministers in London. When I make a decision, it's final. I am the captain of this ship, even if the ship is sinking and on fire. Attlee, you'll have carte blanche. Anything you need. Mountbatten, one more thing. I need a deadline. A finish line. I can't be bogged down in endless talks like poor old Wavell. Give me a date. I work best when the clock is ticking. Attlee, a faint smile of relief. Done. Just get it done, Lewis. Go be the hero. And so, we have our meta-commentary on this pivotal moment. Faced with one of the most complex decolonization challenges in human history, a powder keg of religious hatred, political ambition, and centuries of accumulated grievance, the British government's grand solution was to send in a celebrity. It was the political equivalent of discovering a massive tumor on your patient and deciding the best course of action is to hire a charismatic faith healer instead of a surgeon. Because even if the patient dies, the healer will have such wonderful bedside manner and will look so confident while it's happening. They weren't sending a statesman. They were sending a closer. A man whose primary qualification wasn't his deep knowledge of India. He had very little, but his unshakable belief in his own ability to pull a rabbit out of a hat. And the hat was on fire. The year is 1947. The month is March. A plane touches down on an airfield in Delhi, and out steps the British Empire's last Hail Mary pass. Lord Louis Dickey Mountbatten has arrived. The scene is one of stark contrast. Outgoing is the old viceroy, Lord Wavell, a man who looks like he's been carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders and has just been told the world is also on fire. He's weary, downcast, a symbol of the slow, grinding failure of the old way. But incoming is a flash of lightning. Mountbatten and his equally brilliant and glamorous wife, Edwina, don't just walk off the plane. They practically stride down a celestial red carpet. He is tall, handsome, radiating a tan and a level of confidence that borders on a superpower. He is not just the new viceroy, he is the new CEO of Ending the Raj Inca, and he is here to announce a radical corporate restructuring with extreme prejudice. The stuffy, formal, and increasingly terrified world of the viceroy's house in Delhi is immediately turned upside down. The Mountbattens are a Category 5 hurricane of charisma. The old, dusty protocols are thrown out the window. Mountbatten doesn't stand on ceremony. He wants to get things done. He immediately summons all the key Indian leaders for meetings, but these aren't the stiff, formal audiences of his predecessors. This is the Mountbatten method, a full frontal assault of charm. He flashes his famous smile, puts a familiar hand on people's shoulders, uses their first names, and generally acts less like an imperial overlord and more like a fabulously well-connected friend who has just dropped by to help you solve your little political apocalypse. His energy is relentless. His self-assurance is absolute. He is a man who has never once in his life considered the possibility that he might be wrong. He turns his charm on the leaders of the Congress Party, and for them, It's like a tidal wave. Jawaharlal Nehru in particular is completely captivated. Here was a man, a British royal, who treated him not as a colonial subject, but as an intellectual and political equal. They strike up an immediate and intense friendship. They have long talks, they share ideas, they connect on a deep personal level. The famously handsome Nehru and the dashing Mountbatten become the subcontinent's ultimate power couple, a political bromance for the ages. This bond is further cemented by the genuine friendship that blossoms between Nehru and the intelligent, progressive Edwina Mountbatten. For Congress, this is a breath of fresh air. Finally, a viceroy who gets it, who listens, who seems to be on their side. But then Mountbatten tries to turn the charm on Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and it's like watching a tidal wave crash against a granite cliff. Jinnah, the cold, calculating skeptic, is utterly immune to the Mountbatten magic. He is not impressed by the royal lineage. He is not swayed by the easy familiarity. He is not interested in becoming Dickie's new best friend. He is a lawyer, and he is here to negotiate the terms of a divorce, not to make small talk at a cocktail party. Mountbatten would later complain that every time he tried to make a point to Jinnah, the man would launch into a legalistic monologue. The meetings are stiff, formal, and utterly unproductive. Jinnah sees through the charm to the substance, or lack thereof, and remains aloof, suspicious, and unyielding. This creates a critical imbalance from day one. Mountbatten has a direct, friendly line to the leadership of Congress, but a cold, hostile wall between him and the leader of the Muslim League. Imagine Mountbatten at the end of a long day, pacing his ridiculously opulent study, dictating notes to an aide, to personified dialogue. Mountbatten. Write weekly summary. Nehru, Jawaharlal, top man. Absolutely first rate. We're on the same page. The man has vision. He understands the big picture. He'll be a superb prime minister. Gandhi, the Mahatma, is a fascinating figure. A bit of a spiritual enigma, but the people adore him. As long as we keep him happy, he's an asset. And then, Jinnah. He stops, sighs dramatically. My God, that man is infuriating. It was like negotiating with a brick wall that's also studying to be a lawyer. There's no warmth, no give. I turn on the full charm, the royal smile, everything, and he just looks at me like I'm trying to sell him a faulty used car. He is going to be the main obstacle, the linchpin of this whole disaster. But I'll break him down. I will. He's only one man after all. This supreme self-confidence was rooted in his mandate. His orders from London were simple: get Britain out. The original date proposed for the transfer of power was June 1948. This was already considered a tight, almost reckless schedule. But for a man like Mountbatten, a man of action who saw himself as a naval commander in charge of a high-stakes operation, June 1948 felt like an eternity away. He looked at the chaos erupting all over India and came to a swift, decisive conclusion. The problem wasn't that the plan was bad. The problem was that it was too slow. Delay, in his mind, would only cause more violence as the political situation festered. The only solution was speed. Shock and awe. A lightning-fast decolonization. A quick, clean cut to separate the warring parties before they could do more damage to each other. He believed that a prolonged transition would be a bloody one, so a rushed transition must therefore be the less bloody option. And this is where we get the tragic meta-commentary on the entire Mountbatten enterprise. He was a military man, trained to see problems as objectives to be taken with maximum speed and efficiency. He looked at the Indian deadlock and saw a Gordian knot. A lesser man might have spent months, years patiently trying to untangle it. Mountbatten's solution? Take out a sword and slice it in half. But the Indian subcontinent wasn't a simple knot. It was a tapestry woven over 1,000 years, with 400 million intricate, overlapping, and interconnected threads. And when you take a sword to a tapestry, you don't get two neat, clean halves. You get a shredded, tattered, and utterly ruined mess. His diagnosis was correct. The patient was bleeding. His prescription, amputation with a rusty saw and no anesthetic, was about to become one of the greatest man-made disasters of the 20th century. Lord Mountbatten has completed his whirlwind tour of the Indian political landscape. He's charmed Nehru, been stonewalled by Jinnah, and been philosophically befuddled by Gandhi. And after a few short weeks of this, he arrives at a conclusion with the speed and subtlety of a sledgehammer hitting a pane of glass. The situation is hopeless. The Indian leaders will argue forever if given the chance. The British administration on the ground is crumbling, losing its authority with every passing day as the violence gets worse. The ship of state is taking on water, the crew is starting to mutiny, and the captains are all locked in the dining room arguing over the dinner menu. The original plan, a leisurely, carefully managed handover of power by June 1948, now seems to him like a fantastical luxury. It's a timetable for a country at peace, not for a subcontinent on the brink of a full-blown civil war. So, he decides to apply what he calls shock treatment. His logic, filtered through the lens of a military commander who prefers blitzkriegs to sieges, is that the only way to get the politicians to stop arguing is to set the building on fire. He needs to create a deadline so terrifyingly, impossibly close that it forces everyone to make a decision. The endless circular negotiations have to stop. The time for talking is over. It's time for a deadline, a real one, a do this or die ultimatum. On June 3, 1947, Mountbatten calls a press conference. The room is packed with journalists, politicians, and officials, all buzzing with anticipation. They are expecting an update, perhaps a new proposal, another round of talks. What they get is a political supernova. Mountbatten strides to the podium looking impossibly crisp in his uniform, and calmly announces not only that partition is now the official plan, but he also drops the biggest bombshell of the 20th century. He announces that the British will not be leaving in June of 1948. They will be leaving in a little over 2 months. The final transfer of power to the two new dominions of India and Pakistan will take place on August 15, 1947. You could have heard a pin drop. Then, pandemonium. He has just taken a 14-month process and compressed it into 10 weeks. 10 weeks. He has ripped a full year out of the calendar. The decision is so audacious, so colossally reckless, that no one can quite process it. It's like telling a construction crew they have to build a skyscraper, not in 3 years, but by the end of the summer. And they don't have the blueprints yet. Or the land. The Mountbatten speedrun has officially begun. His public justification was that the accelerating violence made a quick exit the only option. It was a painful but necessary surgery. A clean cut, he argued, would be less bloody than letting the political gangrene spread for another year. But there have always been whispers of a more personal, more egotistical motive. August 15th just happened to be the second anniversary of the day that he, as Supreme Allied Commander in Southeast Asia, had accepted the surrender of the Japanese. What a wonderfully neat, historically significant bookend for his own magnificent career. To begin the new era of Asia on the very anniversary of his greatest triumph. The sheer, magnificent hubris of it is almost beautiful in its own terrible way. Of course, the people who actually had to do the work of dividing a subcontinent were less than thrilled. You can imagine a conversation between Mountbatten and some poor, pencil-pushing civil servant from the India office. Personified dialogue, sensible civil servant, voice trembling, clutching a stack of papers. My Lord Viceroy, August 15th? With all due respect, sir, that is clinically insane. We have to divide the Indian Army, 2 million men, their barracks, their pensions, their rifles. We have to split the entire civil service, the railways, the treasury. We have to calculate the national debt down to the last rupee and decide who pays for it. These are tasks that require years, not weeks. Mountbatten, waving a dismissive hand. Details, my dear boy, mere details. It's the principle of the thing. The deadline focuses the mind. It forces these chaps to be decisive. They've had years to think about it. Now they have a few weeks to do it. It will be a tremendous motivator. Sensible civil servant. But what about the border? The line that will decide which villages are in India and which are in Pakistan. The line that will determine the fate of millions of people. We haven't even appointed the commission to draw it yet. Mountbatten. We'll get someone on it. How hard can it be? A few chaps with a map. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go and charm Nehru into agreeing with this brilliant plan. Let's pause for our meta-commentary, because this decision is the linchpin of the entire disaster. Compressing the partition of a continent into 10 weeks is an act of administrative malpractice so profound it's hard to even comprehend. It guaranteed that the process would be a chaotic, bloody shambles. Every complex issue, from dividing the library books of the Imperial Library to splitting the regiments of the legendary Bengal Lancers, had to be done in a frantic, panicked rush. There was no time for careful consideration. No time for consultation with the people who would actually be affected. No time to set up administrative structures or police forces in the new border regions. It was a decision that prioritized one thing and one thing only: getting Britain out of India with maximum speed, ensuring the problem would become India's and Pakistan's problem, not Britain's, as quickly as possible. It was the ultimate imperial hit and run. The driver, Mountbatten, was flooring the gas pedal, determined to be miles down the road before anyone could even get his license plate number. The consequences of this mad dash would be written in blood. The bombshell has dropped. The clock is ticking with the sound of an executioner's countdown. August 15, 1947. It's no longer a distant possibility. It's a freight train barreling down the tracks. For the leaders of Congress and the Muslim League, who have spent the better part of their lives locked in an intractable argument, Mountbatten's speedrun is the ultimate ultimatum. The time for debate is over. A decision has to be made right now. And so, with the country burning around them and a glamorous viceroy tapping his foot impatiently, they all came to the table and agreed to the previously unthinkable. They agreed to the divorce. The acceptance of partition was not a moment of triumphant resolution. It was a moment of profound, exhausted, and bitter resignation. On the Congress side, Jawaharlal Nehru and his powerful number 2, Vallabhbhai Patel, finally capitulated. For years, they had championed the sacred cause of a united India. The idea of division was anathema to them, a betrayal of their entire movement. But they were also practical men. They looked at the carnage of Calcutta and the chain reaction of riots across the country and saw a horrifying vision of the future, a full-scale, nationwide civil war that could last for years and kill millions. Faced with that apocalyptic scenario, a smaller, partitioned India that they could actually govern seemed like the lesser of two evils. It was a brutal calculation. They chose to amputate the limb to save the life of the patient. It was a decision made with the heaviest of hearts, a pragmatic surrender that felt an awful lot like a defeat. Then there was Muhammad Ali Jinnah. In one sense, this was his ultimate victory. He, through sheer, stubborn, single-minded determination, had willed a new nation into existence. He had won. He was getting his Pakistan. But when he saw the final terms of the deal, the taste of victory must have been incredibly sour. Because the logic of partition he had used to divide India was now going to be applied to the very provinces he coveted most, Punjab and Bengal. These massive, wealthy provinces had mixed populations of Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs. Since they couldn't be handed over whole to Pakistan, they too would be sliced in half. This meant Jinnah would lose the great industrial and cultural center of Calcutta. He would lose the fertile eastern half of Punjab. He would get his homeland, but it would be, in his own famous and bitter words, a moth-eaten and truncated version of the grand state he had envisioned. He accepted it, of course. It was this or nothing. But he was the victor who was being forced to give up half his winnings. And what of Gandhi, the saint, the soul of the nation? He was utterly and completely shattered. He saw the acceptance of partition as a catastrophic moral failure, a repudiation of his entire life's work of promoting Hindu-Muslim unity. He pleaded with the other leaders to reject it, suggesting Jinnah be made the Prime Minister of a united India, anything to avoid the division. But the other leaders, his own protégés like Nehru and Patel, now saw him as a beautiful but impractical idealist. The decision-making power had shifted from the saint to the statesman. Gandhi was politically sidelined, a lonely, heartbroken voice of dissent against a tide of grim pragmatism he could no longer control. So, what exactly did they all agree to in that frantic first week of June 1947? They agreed to the Mountbatten Plan. It stipulated that British India would be split into two new, fully independent dominions, India and Pakistan. The legislatures in the vast populous provinces of Punjab and Bengal would vote on whether to be partitioned. They did, and so the fate of those provinces was sealed. A boundary commission would be appointed later to figure out where to draw the new lines. And as for the 560-odd princely states, the semi-independent kingdoms that weren't technically part of British India, well, they were told they were free to choose which of the two new countries to join. That was it. That was the plan. You can almost picture Mountbatten's internal monologue after the meeting, personified dialogue. Mountbatten to himself. Magnificent, a triumph of diplomacy. Got 'em all to say yes. Jinnah looked like he'd just been served a bowl of cold soup, but he said yes. Nehru looked like he was eulogizing a dear friend, but he said yes. They've all agreed to the principle. The principle is what matters. All the little details like, where the actual border will be, who gets what city, how to divide the army, trifles. We'll sort that out. The important thing is, we have a deal. Now, on to the next item on the agenda, planning the Independence Day ceremony. It must be spectacular, and this is the meta-commentary, the most baffling part of the whole insane rush to August 15th. Everyone, from the highest levels of leadership down to the average citizen, was operating under a collective delusion. They had agreed to carve up their world, but nobody knew what the new map would look like. A Sikh farmer in Punjab had no idea if his ancestral land would soon be in a country called India or a country called Pakistan. A Muslim weaver in Bengal had no idea if the river that ran through his village would become an international border. They were all taking a blind leap of faith, trusting that some committee at some point would draw a fair and sensible line. It was an act of hope so profound it bordered on insanity. It's like agreeing to have your house cut in half by a construction crew, but they want to tell you where they're going to build the new wall until after they've started the demolition. You just have to trust them with the chainsaw. It was a gamble of epic proportions with millions of lives quite literally on the line. So the deal is done. The leaders have shaken hands, albeit with the enthusiasm of men signing their own political obituaries. British India, the massive territory directly ruled by the Crown, is to be carved in two. Simple enough, right? Oh, you sweet summer child, you've forgotten about the fine print. You see, about a third of the subcontinent, an area containing nearly a quarter of the population, wasn't technically British India. This vast, politically weird territory was the princely states, and they were about to become the biggest headache in a process already composed entirely of headaches. What were the princely states? Imagine the Indian subcontinent is a giant pizza. 2/3 of it, British India, is a normal pizza with toppings managed by the British chef. But the other third is a chaotic mess of over 560 individual, pepperoni-sized kingdoms, each with its own ruler. These were the princely states. They had treaties with Britain where the Crown handled their defense and foreign policy, a system called paramountcy. But internally, the rulers, the Maharajas and Nawabs, were absolute monarchs. They had their own laws, their own armies, their own tax systems, and in many cases, their own spectacular levels of eccentricity. We're talking rulers who spent fortunes on pet tigers, who owned hundreds of Rolls-Royces, who believed they were descended from the moon. It was a bizarre, feudal archipelago marooned in the 20th century. Now here's the kicker. The Mountbatten Plan declared that on August 15th, British paramountcy would lapse. This meant the treaties were null and void. The British were quitting their job as the manager of this vast royal gated community. Legally speaking, this meant that all 560 plus of these states, from the gigantic country-sized Hyderabad to tiny estates smaller than Central Park, would become fully independent nations. The map of the subcontinent would look like a piece of Swiss cheese that had been shot with a shotgun. This was a nightmare scenario for a stable future. Both India and Pakistan needed these states integrated into their territory to be viable countries. So Mountbatten, with the full backing of the future governments, laid down the law. Your theoretical independence is a fantasy. You have two options. Join India or join Pakistan. That's it. And thus began the most high-stakes, geopolitically insane dating show in history. Let's call it, Who Wants to Accede to a Supernation? For 10 frantic weeks, the subcontinent's most powerful men became suitors, vying for the allegiance of these pampered and often bewildered princes. In one corner, you have suitor number 1, India, represented by the formidable Vallabhbhai Patel. Patel was Congress's hard man, the ultimate pragmatist. He was not here to play games. His pitch was simple, direct, and backed by a menacing undertone. Join India, he'd say. Geographically, you are part of us. Your people are part of us. We will offer you stability, a place in our new democracy, and a very generous, tax-free pension for life called a privy purse. In return, you sign this instrument of accession. If you refuse, well, we have a very large army, and we would hate for there to be any instability in your kingdom. In the other corner, suitor number 2, Pakistan, represented by Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Jinnah had less to offer in terms of money and military muscle, so he made his pitch based on ideology. Are you a Muslim ruler? Do your people share our faith? Then join us. Cast your lot with the world's newest Muslim homeland. It is your destiny. The show's host, of course, was Lord Mountbatten, who cajoled, flattered, and bullied the princes relentlessly. Personified dialogue. Mountbatten, as host, welcome back to Who Wants to Exceed. Our next contestant is the Nawab of Junagadh. Now, Nawabji, you are a Muslim, but your population is over 80% Hindu, and your state is completely surrounded by territory that is about to become India. A real pickle. So, what's your choice? India and its fat pension, or Pakistan, which is, I must point out, hundreds of miles away across the sea? Nawab of Junagadh, ignoring the audience. My heart is with my Muslim brothers. My state has a coastline. We can make it work. I choose Pakistan. Patel, from the suitor number 1 chair, muttering into a microphone. He's chosen. Poorly. Prepare the army. Mountbatten. A bold choice. A dramatic choice. Let's see how that works out for him. We'll be right back after the break. For the most part, the process, though frantic, was straightforward. The vast majority of states made the logical choice and were gobbled up by Patel's well-oiled accession machine. But, as on any good reality show, the real drama came from the handful of contestants who refused to play along. 3 states became geopolitical time bombs. Junagadh, as we saw, chose Pakistan, a decision India would soon correct with a police action. The ridiculously wealthy Nizam of Hyderabad, a Muslim ruling a huge Hindu majority right in the belly of India, decided he wanted neither. He wanted to be an independent king. And then there was the biggest prize, the most complicated problem of all, Kashmir, a Hindu Maharaja ruling over a majority Muslim population with a territory that bordered both India and Pakistan. The Maharaja of Kashmir, in a fit of legendary indecisiveness, chose to choose nothing. He just waited, hoping the problem would go away. This is the meta-commentary on the sheer folly of it all. In their mad rush to leave, the British essentially punted the fate of nearly 100 million people to a handful of hereditary autocrats. It was a chaotic, undemocratic scramble, where the future was decided not by popular will, but by the backroom deals, threats, and personal ambitions of men who were more concerned with their 21-gun salutes than the welfare of their subjects. It was a recipe for conflict, and the 3 problem states, Junagadh, Hyderabad, and especially Kashmir, would become festering wounds that would poison the relationship between India and Pakistan for all time. While the great geopolitical dating show for the princely states is providing its share of drama, Mountbatten and the leadership of India and Pakistan have a slightly more pressing problem on their hands. It's a tiny, insignificant little detail they've all agreed to but haven't actually figured out. Where, in the name of all that is holy, is the actual border going to be? They've agreed to partition Punjab, a massive province of nearly 30 million people, Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims all mixed together. They've agreed to partition Bengal, an even more massive province of over 60 million souls equally intertwined. But they don't have a line. The most important line in the world, the line that will define 2 countries and seal the fate of millions, does not exist. The clock is ticking down to August 15th, and they are, in effect, trying to build two houses without having drawn the property line. So they decide they need a boundary commission, or rather, two of them, one for Punjab, one for Bengal. The idea is that each commission will have 4 judges, 2 nominated by the Congress and 2 by the Muslim League, and a neutral, independent chairman. They quickly realize that having the Indian judges is basically a waste of time. The 2 Congress judges will vote for one line, the 2 League judges will vote for another, and they will be deadlocked until the end of time. This means that the entire weight of the final, binding, non-appealable decision will fall on one man, the chairman. He would be the sole arbiter, the ultimate mapmaker, the man who would literally draw the line between India and Pakistan. This brings us to the most important job interview of 1947. What kind of person do you hire for a job like this? You'd want an expert, right? A world-renowned geographer, perhaps. A seasoned sociologist with a deep understanding of the intricate cultural and religious tapestry of Punjab and Bengal. A historian who understands the ancient connections between communities. Maybe a team of all 3, given several years to conduct a detailed, village-by-village survey. Well, the British government, in its infinite wisdom, looked at that list of qualifications and said, "Nah, that sounds complicated. Let's go in a completely different direction." Their selection criteria were, in retrospect, a masterclass in catastrophic thinking. First, the chairman had to be completely impartial, and to guarantee impartiality, they decided he had to be someone who knew absolutely, positively, nothing about India. No prior experience, no Indian friends, no business interests, no sentimental attachment. His ignorance was seen not as a liability, but as his single greatest qualification. Second, he had to be fast, incredibly fast. They didn't want a ditherer or a philosopher. They wanted a legal machine, a man who could absorb mountains of data and make a decisive ruling without getting bogged down in emotion or, facts on the ground. He had to be a man capable of supreme intellectual detachment. And third, he had to be British, someone whose authority both sides would have to, in theory, accept. So they went looking for a man who was brilliant, efficient, and blissfully ignorant. And they found him. His name was Sir Cyril Radcliffe. Radcliffe was, by all accounts, a legal superstar in London. A brilliant mind, a master of the courts, renowned for his razor-sharp intellect and his ability to cut to the heart of any complex case. He was also, and this was the key, the most profoundly unqualified person on the planet for this specific job. He had never been to India. He had, it said, never even been east of Paris. He didn't know a Sikh from a Shia. He couldn't tell you the difference between a chapati and a sari. He was a man whose entire knowledge of the subcontinent could probably have been written on the back of a postage stamp with room to spare. He was the perfect candidate. We can only imagine the conversation in Whitehall that led to his appointment. Personified dialogue, British official 1. Right, we need a chairman for this India boundary business. Any ideas? British official 2. What about Sir Jennings? He spent 20 years as a judge in Lahore. Knows the Punjab like the back of his hand. Official 1. Good heavens, no, he knows the place. He'll be biased. He probably has opinions and feelings about it. Can't have that. We need a blank slate, someone objective. Official 2. Objective? You mean ignorant. Official 1. Precisely. Ignorance is objectivity. I've just had a memo from the Viceroy's office. They're very keen on this lawyer, Cyril Radcliffe. Apparently the man thinks curry is a verb. Official 2, he sounds perfect. Will he do it? Official 1, for the fee we're offering, he'd draw a map on the surface of the sun. Just tell him it's a short-term assignment. Very short-term. So this brilliant but utterly clueless lawyer is summoned and offered the job of a lifetime. A job that is also a curse. He is to fly to India, a country he has never seen. And in the span of about 5 weeks, he will be given the sole and final authority to draw a line through the homelands of 88 million people. He will be the chairman of 2 commissions where the other members are designed to disagree, leaving him with the godlike and utterly terrifying power to decide. This is our meta-commentary, and it is a bleak one. The decision to appoint Radcliffe represents the absolute zenith of imperial arrogance. It's the belief that a complex, deeply human problem, steeped in centuries of history, culture, and religion, can be solved like a math equation by a sufficiently clever outsider who doesn't care about the variables. It's like asking a brilliant architect who has only ever designed skyscrapers in London to perform brain surgery based on a tourist map of the human head and giving him until the end of the day to do it. The British weren't looking for the right man for the job. They were looking for a legal instrument, a tool, to get a distasteful but necessary task done with maximum speed and minimum fuss. They found their tool in Cyril Radcliffe, and he was about to discover that the map is not the territory, not by a long shot. Sir Cyril Radcliffe, the brilliant London lawyer who knew nothing about India, accepted the job. On July 8, 1947, his plane touched down in Delhi. He stepped out of the aircraft and was hit by two things simultaneously: the crushing, suffocating wall of heat of the Indian summer, and the equally crushing weight of the task ahead of him. This was not going to be a pleasant working holiday. This was going to be, without a doubt, the single worst summer vacation in human history. Mountbatten, keen to preserve Radcliffe's perfect impartiality, whisked him away to a secluded bungalow. He was to be kept in a sterile bubble, shielded from the grubby world of Indian politics. He wasn't to meet with Nehru or Jinnah. He was to be an oracle, receiving tribute in the form of documents and issuing a final divine judgment in the form of a map. He was given an office, a few aides, and the tools for his world-altering task. And it was here, in this sweltering, isolated bungalow, that the true farcical horror of his situation became clear. The tools he was given were not just inadequate. They were a joke. First, the maps. The Boundary Commission was not given state-of-the-art satellite-quality survey maps. Oh no. They were given what were essentially antique store curiosities. The maps were old, inaccurate, and often contradictory. Some were based on surveys from the 1920s. Rivers had literally changed their course in the intervening decades. Entire villages were marked in the wrong place. Crucial infrastructure that would determine the economic life of a region, like the massive canal networks that irrigated the Punjab, were either missing or incorrectly drawn. Radcliffe was being asked to perform microscopic surgery on the living body of a nation, and his only guide was a blurry, out-of-focus photograph taken from a great distance, 20 years ago. Second, the data. To determine where the contiguous majorities of Muslims and non-Muslims were, he was handed census data. The most recent census was from 1941. It was 6 years out of date, an eternity in a country with a rapidly growing population. It had also been compiled during the Second World War and was notoriously unreliable. Worse, the census counted people by administrative district, which were often huge. But Radcliffe's job was to draw a line through these districts, at the level of the local tehsil or even the village. The data was simply too coarse, too clumsy for the delicate task at hand. It could tell him a district was 60% Muslim and 40% Hindu, but it couldn't tell him that all the Hindus lived on one side of the river and all the Muslims on the other. And third, and most crucially, there would be no field visits, no ground surveys. With the deadline of August 15th just 5 weeks away, there was simply no time. Cyril Radcliffe, the man tasked with drawing a line that would slice through farms, bisect villages and separate communities, would never once set foot in the lands he was dividing. He would never see the golden wheat fields of the Punjab. He would never see the lush green river deltas of Bengal. His entire understanding of this vibrant, complex human landscape would be based on faulty maps and bad data, viewed from a stuffy room in Delhi. He was a god, drawing the world from on high, and he was completely blind. His official instructions were a masterpiece of vague, bureaucratic language. He was to divide the provinces based on Muslim and non-Muslim majority areas. Simple enough. But then came the poison pill, a little clause that said he must also take into account other factors. What in God's name were other factors? No one defined it. Did it mean irrigation systems? Road networks? The location of Sikh holy sites, most of which were in Muslim-majority areas of Punjab? It was a blank check for him to make any arbitrary decision he wanted, and also a guarantee that whatever he decided, one side would accuse him of ignoring the all-important other factors. Imagine his first day in the office. Personified dialogue. Radcliffe, mopping his brow with a handkerchief, staring at a map of Punjab. Good Lord. According to this, the main irrigation canal for this entire district appears to flow uphill and then vanish into a forest that the other map says is a desert. Is this correct? Young aide. That's the information we have, sir. The data is, shall we say, open to interpretation. Radcliffe. And these petitions from the Sikh community. They claim that if we draw the line based on a simple religious majority, all of their most sacred shrines and a huge portion of their agricultural land will end up in Pakistan. That seems like a significant other factor, wouldn't you say? Aide. Absolutely, sir. A very compelling other factor. Of course, the Muslim League has submitted a 12-volume memorandum explaining why the canal heads are the only other factor that truly matters. And Congress has submitted their own report arguing that railway lines are the key other factor. So, Radcliffe, staring into the middle distance. So I am to draw a line based on bad data, using vague instructions that will either ruin a region's economy, commit an act of cultural sacrilege, or both. And I have 5 weeks. Splendid. And so this was his life. Day after day in the crushing heat, Radcliffe sat and listened to the lawyers from Congress and the League present their endlessly competing claims, burying him in an avalanche of biased memoranda, bogus statistics, and mutual accusations. He was a judge in the most important case in the world, where both sides were lying, the evidence was forged, and he was forbidden from visiting the scene of the crime. This wasn't a judicial process, it was a nightmare. Our meta-commentary is this: the entire Radcliffe Commission was a deliberate farce, a piece of political theater designed to give a veneer of legal legitimacy to what was fundamentally an act of brutal, arbitrary amputation. The British government didn't want a fair line. They wanted a line, any line. And they needed it by a deadline that made a fair line impossible to draw. They hired a man, gave him a blindfold and a crayon, and told him to create a masterpiece. So there he sits. Sir Cyril Radcliffe. The loneliest and most powerful man in India, trapped in his sweltering Delhi bungalow with a stack of bad maps, a pile of lies masquerading as data, and a deadline that gets more terrifying with every tick of the clock. He has to draw a line. But how? How do you perform this act of geographic butchery when you have no reliable instruments, and you're forbidden from even looking at the patient? You do it with the only tool you have left: cold, brutal, and tragically misguided abstraction. Radcliffe, being a lawyer, tried to treat the problem like a complex legal dispute. He would weigh the arguments presented by the lawyers for the Congress and the Muslim League. The problem was both sides were presenting wildly different sets of facts, maps, and population figures. It was like trying to judge a case where both the plaintiff and the defendant are screaming at you in a language you don't understand, and you suspect both of them are pathological liars. With no way to verify anything on the ground, he was forced to make decisions based on what looked neatest on his terrible maps. He started drawing lines that followed existing, but often completely arbitrary, administrative boundaries, districts or smaller sub-districts called tehsils. If a tehsil had a 50.1% Muslim population according to the 1941 census, it was penciled in for Pakistan. If it had a 50.1% Hindu Sikh population, it went to India. It was a simple, mathematical approach to a problem that was anything but. The result was a level of absurdity so profound, it would be hilarious if it weren't so tragic. The line he was drawing, a neat stroke of a pen on a map in Delhi, was a clumsy chainsaw on the ground. It paid no attention to the human landscape. It sliced through ancient villages, separating one half of a community from the other. Suddenly, your house was in India, but the well you'd used your entire life was 50 yards away in Pakistan. A mosque would end up on one side of the border while the majority of its congregation was now on the other. It was an act of geometric violence. Imagine a farmer in Punjab. For centuries, his family has owned a plot of land. His house sits on one end, his fields stretch out before him, and the river where he waters his cattle is at the far end. One day, a rumor trickles down that a line has been drawn. The line, it turns out, runs right down the middle of his property. His house is now in India. His fields are in Pakistan, and the river is the international border patrolled by soldiers. To farm his own land, he would now need a passport and a visa. This wasn't a hypothetical. This was the reality for thousands upon thousands of people. The Radcliffe Line was a brutalist piece of architecture dropped onto a landscape of interconnected lives, and it crushed everything that lay beneath it. You can almost hear Radcliffe in his study at night, arguing with the very line he is creating. Personified dialogue. Radcliffe, leaning over a map, utterly exhausted. All right, if I draw the line here, along the Ujjain River, it gives the Shakargar Tehsil to Pakistan. The numbers work. It seems defensible. The line, a sarcastic whisper in his mind. Defensible? You brilliant man, you've just isolated the entire Gurdaspur district from the rest of India. Their only road and rail link to Kashmir now runs through a foreign country. That seems sustainable. Radcliffe erases the line, redraws it. Fine. We'll cut across the land here, giving Gurdaspur's Pathankot Tehsil to India. That keeps the road open, but it violates the strict contiguous majority principle. The line. Oh, I see. So now we care about infrastructure. Wonderful. In that case, you should know that this line you've just drawn cuts the Upper Barry Doab Canal system in two. The headworks that control the water for the entire Lahore region will be in India, and the farms that need the water will be in Pakistan. I'm sure that won't cause any friction at all in the future. You're a genius at creating lasting peace. Radcliffe. I have to choose. These are the other factors I'm meant to consider. It's impossible. This is the central madness of the process. The fates of millions were being decided by these agonizing, abstract trade-offs made by a single man who had never seen the places he was condemning. He had to decide what was more important: a road, a river, a canal, or a holy shrine. And all of it was based on data he knew he couldn't trust. At no point in this entire process was anyone asked, hey, you, the people who actually live here, where do you think the border should go? There were no plebiscites, no consultations, no town hall meetings. The people were not participants in their own destiny. They were dots on a map, percentages in a column, problems to be solved. And this is the meta-commentary. The Radcliffe Line is the ultimate symbol of the failure of top-down colonial thinking. It's the belief that you can solve a deeply human problem by ignoring the humans. It was an exercise in imposing a clean, simple geometric order on a messy, complex organic reality. They drew a line that looked tidy on a piece of paper in an office, and in doing so, they created a jagged, bleeding wound on the face of the earth. It was a masterpiece of cartography and a catastrophe of humanity. And nowhere would the consequences of this blind map making be more devastating than in the two provinces that were now squarely on Radcliffe's operating table: Punjab and Bengal. Cyril Radcliffe sits hunched over his maps, the sweat beading on his brow a perfect mirror of the pressure he's under. He's about to take his pen and apply it to the first of his two victims, the province of Punjab. And if he thought this was going to be a simple case of drawing a line between a block of Muslims and a block of Hindus, he was in for a rude awakening. Because Punjab wasn't a simple two-tone puzzle. It was a shimmering, chaotic, and deeply interwoven three-dimensional mosaic. And trying to cut it in half was like trying to neatly slice a rainbow. First, you have to understand what Punjab was. It wasn't just a province, it was a cultural universe. The land of 5 rivers, it was the historic breadbasket of India. A vast, fertile plain made prosperous by an intricate network of British-built canals. For centuries, it had been a crossroads of civilizations. Its cities, like the magnificent Lahore, were cosmopolitan hubs of culture, education, and commerce. But its defining feature was its unique demographic cocktail. It was, broadly speaking, about 57% Muslim, 28% Hindu, and 13% Sikh. But those numbers are a lie because they suggest separation. The reality was a complete intermingling. Muslims, Hindus, and Sikhs weren't living in neat, color-coded zones. They were neighbors. They worked in the same fields, shopped in the same markets, spoke the same Punjabi language, and shared a deep, common provincial identity. Their lives and livelihoods were hopelessly, beautifully, and now, tragically, tangled together. The biggest complication, the variable that broke every simple equation, was the Sikhs. For the Sikh community, Punjab wasn't just a place they lived. It was their holy land. It was their Jerusalem, their Vatican, their Mecca, all rolled into one. Their faith was born here. Their first guru, Guru Nanak, was born in a village called Nankana Sahib, near Lahore. Their most sacred shrine on earth, the spectacular Golden Temple, was in the city of Amritsar. Dozens of other holy sites were scattered across the length and breadth of the province. While they were only 13% of the population, they were a powerful, prosperous, and fiercely proud community of farmers and soldiers who punched far above their demographic weight. And here was Radcliffe's impossible problem. There was no Sikh land. The Sikh population was concentrated most heavily right in the heart of central Punjab, the very area that had to be bisected. They were a significant minority on both sides of any potential line. There was no way to draw a border based on a Muslim versus non-Muslim majority that wouldn't slice the Sikh community right down the middle. Any line you drew would leave millions of Sikhs and dozens of their most sacred shrines, including the birthplace of their founder, on the Pakistani side. The Sikhs, who had a long and often bloody history of conflict with Muslim rulers, were utterly terrified of being a small minority in a new Islamic state. They made it clear in no uncertain terms that any line that put their holy sites in Pakistan was a declaration of war. As if that wasn't bad enough, the entire economy of the province was a single, integrated machine. The lifeblood of Punjab was its canal system. The British had engineered a network that diverted water from the 5 rivers, turning the arid plains of western Punjab into some of the most productive agricultural land in Asia. But the canal headworks, the dams and control gates that were the faucets for this entire system, were located in the eastern part of the province. Radcliffe could see from his maps that the east would have a non-Muslim majority and would go to India, while the west had a Muslim majority and would go to Pakistan. He was being asked to draw a line that would give India the faucet and Pakistan the garden that would die without the water. Imagine the 3 communities trying to plead their case to the ghost of Radcliffe. Personified dialogue Punjab Muslim. Sir, it is simple justice. The West is ours. Lahore is our soul. These are the lands where we are the majority. They must form the heart of Pakistan. Punjab Hindu. But the wealth of Lahore, the colleges, the businesses, we built them. And the eastern districts are ours by right. The line must protect us. Punjab Sikh, voice cracking with fury. You talk of lines. What line can you draw? If you give Lahore to Pakistan, you take our history. If you draw the line at the Ravi River, you leave Nankana Sahib, the birthplace of our guru, in a foreign land. If you draw the line at the Sutlej, you abandon millions of our people. There is no line. There is only sacrilege. To divide the Punjab is to slaughter us. Radcliffe's ghost, a weary sigh echoes from the map. I have my instructions, and the numbers are all I have. And while Radcliffe agonized in his Delhi bunker, out in the real Punjab, the summer of 1947 was turning into a season of terror. Everyone knew the line was coming. Nobody knew where it would be. But they were all preparing for the worst. Private militias, the Muslim League National Guard, the Hindu RSS, and the Sikh Akali Fauj were drilling and arming their members in broad daylight. Swords, spears, and homemade bombs were being stockpiled. It was a frantic, paranoid arms race. Rumors would sweep through a city that Lahore was going to India, and Muslims would start to panic. The next day, the rumor would flip, and Hindus and Sikhs would start sharpening their knives. The uncertainty was a poison, turning lifelong neighbors into mortal enemies. Here's the meta-commentary. Dividing Punjab was not a cartographic exercise. It was an act of vivisection on a living, breathing, and deeply complex organism. It was like asking a doctor to separate 3 conjoined triplets who all share a single vital organ. Any cut, no matter where you make it, is going to be fatal to all 3. The British had spent a century creating the modern Punjab, binding its communities together with railways, canals, and a shared economy. Now in their final panicked act, they were ordering a man with a pen to rip it all apart, pretending you could tear a tapestry in 2 and still have 2 perfect smaller tapestries. All you get is a ruin, While Sir Cyril Radcliffe is mentally torturing himself over the three-way car crash of Punjab, his gaze must also shift 1,500 miles to the east, to the other condemned province. On the far side of the subcontinent, another heart is on the chopping block, Bengal. And if the tragedy in Punjab was one of violent, competing identities, the tragedy in Bengal was one of a shared, singular identity, being brutally torn in two. This wasn't just a different place. It was a different kind of crime. Bengal was not the Punjab. It wasn't a land of hardy farmers on a dry plain. It was a lush, green, waterlogged world of 1,000 rivers, a vast delta of incredible fertility and staggering poverty. But more than anything, Bengal was the cultural and intellectual epicenter of India. This was the land of poets and revolutionaries, of Nobel laureates like Rabindranath Tagore, of philosophers and artists who had led the Indian Renaissance. There was a fierce, passionate, and profound sense of a unique Bengali identity, an identity that was built on a shared language and a shared culture that often felt stronger than the divisions of religion. To be Bengali was its own kind of nationality. On paper, dividing Bengal looked deceptively simpler than dividing Punjab. There was no complicating third group like the Sikhs. It was a straightforward demographic split. The western part of the province had a Hindu majority, while the larger, more populous eastern part had a Muslim majority. Easy, right? Just draw a line down the middle. The problem was that for centuries, these two halves had functioned as a single, inseparable organism. They were economically, completely codependent. The perfect example of this is the jute industry. Jute, the humble fiber used to make burlap sacks and rope, was the cash crop of Bengal, its golden fleece. The vast majority of the world's jute was grown by Muslim farmers in the fertile fields of East Bengal. But 100% of the jute mills, the massive, noisy, smoke-belching factories that processed the raw fiber into valuable finished goods, were located in the west, clustered around the great metropolis of Calcutta. Calcutta itself, the second largest city in the British Empire, was the undisputed hub of the entire region. It was the port, the financial capital, the industrial engine, and it had a firm Hindu majority. So, any line that separated the Hindu majority west from the Muslim majority east would create an economic absurdity. You would be creating a new country, East Pakistan, that grew all the raw materials but had no factories to process them and no deep water port to export them from. And you would be leaving the Indian state of West Bengal with a massive industrial complex and a world-class port, but with its supply of raw materials now located in a foreign and potentially hostile country. It was an act of economic self-sabotage on a national scale. You were giving the farmers to one country and the factories to another, then severing the railway lines that connected them. So profound was this shared Bengali identity that for a brief, flickering moment, a third option emerged. A handful of prominent Bengali politicians from both sides of the religious divide, including H.S. Surawardi of the Muslim League and Sarat Chandra Bose from Congress, floated a radical proposal, an independent, united Bengal. They argued that Bengal should join neither India nor Pakistan but become its own sovereign nation, a third country born from a shared culture rather than a divided faith. The idea had considerable support, but the national high commands of both parties sitting in Delhi absolutely despised it. Nehru and Patel would not tolerate the idea of a massive independent country on their eastern border, taking the jewel of Calcutta with it. And Jinnah, after a moment's hesitation, decided he would rather have a broken piece of Bengal for Pakistan than no Bengal at all. The dream of a united Bengal was crushed by the bigger players. Imagine the two halves of Bengal having a final, heartbreaking conversation as Radcliffe's pen hovers over the map. Personified dialogue. West Bengal, industrial, centered on Calcutta. Wait, you're leaving? But I have all the mills, the port, the whole machinery of commerce. Your jute is worthless until I process it. East Bengal, rural, agricultural. And your mills are just scrap metal without my jute. This is madness. What about our language, our poetry, our shared love for fish and existential angst? You can't divide a culture. West Bengal. This line doesn't make sense. It's giving you the farm and me the kitchen, but building a brick wall in between. We'll both starve. East Bengal. It's worse than that. It's taking a single book of poetry and ripping every page in half. We'll be left with scraps that don't even rhyme anymore. And that is the perfect meta-commentary for the partition of Bengal. It was an act of profound cultural vandalism. While Punjab was being torn apart by its differences, Bengal was being torn apart despite its similarities. It was a region where a shared linguistic and cultural heritage formed a bridge between its Hindu and Muslim populations. The Radcliffe Line blew up that bridge. It took a single cohesive civilization, with a single economy and a single literary tradition, and shattered it. The two halves, which would become India's West Bengal and Pakistan's East Pakistan and later Bangladesh, would spend the next several decades trying to function as separate entities, forever haunted by the ghost of the whole they once were. For a man in a room in Delhi, it was just another line on a map. For the people of Bengal, it was a wound carved directly into their soul. The job is done. By the second week of August 1947, Sir Cyril Radcliffe, a man who now looks 10 years older than when he first arrived, has completed his cursed task. He has taken his pen, his faulty maps, and his vague instructions, and he has drawn a line. Two lines, in fact. One that carves up Punjab and one that dismembers Bengal. He has produced his report, the document that holds the fate of millions within its pages. Utterly broken by the weight of what he has done, he hands the maps over to the Viceroy's office. He then famously refuses to accept his fee of £2,000, packs his bags, gets on the first available flight back to London, and makes a solemn vow to never, ever return to the subcontinent. He knows he has just officiated the birth of two nations, and he wants absolutely no part in the bloody christening. So now, the maps, arguably the most politically explosive documents on the planet, are sitting on Lord Mountbatten's desk. The date is around August 12th. Independence is just 3 days away. The responsible thing to do, the sane thing to do, would be to publish the maps immediately, announce the border, let people know their fate. This would give the authorities, however stretched they are, a few precious days to move troops to the new, volatile border regions. It would allow local administrators to prepare for population movements. It would give people a chance, however slim, to make an informed decision about their future. It would be chaotic, yes. It would be violent, almost certainly. But it would be a managed chaos, a violence that the still existing British administration had a responsibility to contain. Lord Mountbatten, the master showman, the A-list celebrity of decolonization, took one look at that sane, responsible option and threw it directly into the garbage. He looked at the map, saw the brutal, controversial, and downright messy lines that Radcliffe had drawn. Lahore, the heart of Punjab, going to Pakistan. The district of Gurdaspur, with its slim Muslim majority, going to India to preserve a route to Kashmir. The Chittagong hill tracts in Bengal, a non-Muslim area, being handed to Pakistan. He saw a recipe for instant, widespread outrage and rioting, and he made a decision of such profound, breathtaking cynicism that it still boggles the mind. He decided to keep the maps a secret. He locked the Radcliffe Award away in a safe and ordered that it was not to be published until after the independence celebrations were over. His official justification was all about the vibes. He had meticulously planned the transfer of power to be a moment of historic pomp and circumstance. He envisioned himself on a balcony, presiding over cheering crowds, fluttering flags, and a joyous, peaceful birth of two new nations. He wanted the photographs in the history books to show him as the triumphant statesman who had delivered freedom. Announcing that he was about to make millions of people refugees and condemn entire cities to violence would, really spoil the party. It would be unseemly. It would mar the celebrations. But the real reason was far more calculating. By withholding the maps until after midnight on August 15th, he performed a masterful act of political evasion. Any violence that broke out before independence was Britain's failure. It was the last shameful chapter of the British Raj. But any violence that broke out after independence? Well, that was the fault of the new sovereign governments of India and Pakistan. It was their problem now. It was the ultimate pass-the-buck maneuver. Mountbatten wasn't just hiding the map. He was hiding from responsibility. He was winding up a time bomb, setting the timer for 2 days in the future, and then handing it over to two brand new, inexperienced governments just seconds before it was set to explode. You can almost hear the conversation he had with his own conscience as he turned the key on that safe. Personified dialogue. Mountbatten's conscience. Louis, what are you doing? You have to tell them. Millions of people have the right to know if their homes are about to be in a different country. This is a matter of life and death. Mountbatten, and ruin my big day? Don't be absurd. The 15th of August will be a perfect, dignified ceremony, a testament to a peaceful transfer of power. We can't have that spoiled by a lot of messy rioting. Conscience. Forget the ceremony. Think of the consequences. By hiding this, you are guaranteeing an information vacuum. That vacuum will be filled with fear, rumor, and paranoia. It will make the violence 100 times worse when the truth finally comes out. Mountbatten. But it will come out on the 16th or the 17th, by which point it will be Prime Minister Nehru's problem and Governor General Jinnah's problem, not mine. My job is to get the curtain down on the Raj on a high note. What happens after the show is over is a matter for the next theater company. Now I must go practice my salute. And so, in the final frantic days before freedom, a blanket of terrifying uncertainty fell over the land. In Lahore, Hindus and Sikhs kept their bags packed, desperately hoping for a last-minute miracle that would place their city in India. In Amritsar, Muslims prayed that the line would be drawn just east of them. No one knew anything. Life and death decisions were being made based on whispers. I heard from a man whose cousin works in the telegraph office that Calcutta is going to Pakistan. I heard from a soldier that the Sikhs have been promised all of central Punjab. The atmosphere was thick with a toxic cocktail of hope and fear, a silence before a storm of unimaginable fury. This is the meta-commentary. This was an act of supreme moral cowardice. Mountbatten chose pristine optics over human lives. He prioritized a good photo op over preventing a bloodbath. He was the director of a grand play who, upon realizing the final act would be a real fire, decided to lock the exits and leave just before the curtain rose. The map of doom is complete. It sits locked away in a safe in the Viceroy's palace in Delhi, a ticking time bomb of ink and paper. Outside the palace walls, the great Indian subcontinent holds its breath. The countdown to freedom has begun. August 13th. August 14th. The official narrative, the one being prepared for the history books and the BBC newsreels, is one of joyous anticipation. But on the ground, in the villages of Punjab and the towns of Bengal, the atmosphere is anything but joyful. It's thick with a suffocating, poisonous dread. It is the dread of the unknown. Thanks to Mountbatten's decision to keep the border a secret, the final days of the British Raj are not governed by information but by its terrifying absence. This information vacuum becomes a breeding ground for the most toxic and virulent rumors. In the absence of truth, people will believe anything. A story spreads like wildfire through a Sikh village that the nearby canal has been poisoned by Muslims. A rumor rips through a Muslim neighborhood in Amritsar that armed Sikh gangs, the Jathas, are coming to burn down the mosque that night. A forged map appears in a marketplace, showing a line that awards a key town to one side or the other, causing instant panic and sectarian clashes. The rumors become a malevolent character in this story, a phantom whispering in everyone's ear, turning lifelong neighbors into objects of suspicion and fear. Every stranger is a potential spy. Every unusual gathering is a potential mob. The normal rhythms of life grind to a halt. Farmers are afraid to go out to their fields. Shopkeepers shutter their businesses. People are making life or death decisions based on what their cousin's friend heard from a man who works near the railway station. The lack of an official line from the government is infinitely more terrifying than the worst possible truth would have been. At least the truth is something you can react to. A rumor is a ghost you can't fight. In this charged atmosphere, the violence begins to escalate. It's not yet the full-scale cataclysm that is to come, but it's the horrifying prelude. In Punjab, the private militias that have been arming for months begin to flex their muscles. They engage in what they see as preemptive strikes. Armed gangs start attacking villages and urban neighborhoods that are dominated by the other community, but are located in territory they feel should belong to them. The goal is simple and brutal: terror. They want to scare the other side into fleeing, to create facts on the ground, to cleanse the land before the official line is even known. It's a violent, bloody attempt to gerrymander the border with swords and fire. The British had created a special 50,000-man military unit, the Punjab Boundary Force, to keep the peace. It was a good idea on paper, but in reality, it was a tragic failure. 50,000 men was a drop in the ocean in a province the size of the United Kingdom, with a population of 30 million. The force was stretched impossibly thin, and its soldiers were having an identity crisis of their own. A Muslim soldier from Lahore, a Hindu soldier from Amritsar, and a Sikh soldier from Ludhiana might have served in the same platoon for years. But in a few days they would be citizens of different and potentially enemy countries. Their loyalties were fracturing, and the force was paralyzed and ineffective. The human cost of this uncertainty was immeasurable. Imagine a conversation between two old friends, a Sikh and a Muslim, who own adjacent shops in a small town in central Punjab. Personified dialogue. Sikh shopkeeper: Hassan, my friend. My wife wants us to leave, to go east to Amritsar. She heard the line will be drawn west of our town, that we will be in Pakistan. Muslim shopkeeper: and my brother wants me to go west to Lahore. He heard the exact opposite, that the Indians will get this town. Who do we believe, Arjun? We have lived here our whole lives. Our fathers lived here. Our grandfathers are buried in this soil. Sikh shopkeeper: I don't know. But last night a patrol of the Akali militia came through the street. They didn't hurt anyone. They just marched to show us they could. It was a warning. Muslim shopkeeper: I know. The young men from the mosque are standing guard at night now with sticks. We are old friends, Arjan. But now, when our sons look at each other, they don't see friends. They see a threat. All because of a line that a man in Delhi has drawn, a line that we are not allowed to see. This was the Sophie's choice facing millions. Do you stay put, pray the rumors are wrong, and risk waking up as a hated and helpless minority in a hostile new country? Or do you abandon everything you own, your home, your land, your livelihood, and flee, becoming a refugee based on a whisper, which might turn out to be completely false? It was an impossible, torturous gamble. Here is the final damning meta-commentary on the British exit. In its final hours, the Great British Raj, the government that prided itself on its administrative prowess, simply abdicated. It ceased to govern. It saw the fire starting and decided its only remaining duty was to get its own people out safely. They were obsessing over the details of the flag-lowering ceremony in Delhi while Punjab was beginning to burn. It was a complete and total dereliction of duty. They weren't just leaving, they were running away from the consequences of their own actions, and in doing so, they were leaving millions of people trapped in the dark, staring into an abyss of violence. The countdown was almost over. The countdown is over. The night of August 14th, 1947 has fallen. In the cities and villages of Punjab and Bengal, it is a night of unbearable tension, of families huddled in the dark, listening to the sounds of armed gangs gathering in the distance. But in the capital cities, it is a night of pure, unadulterated ecstasy. After centuries of foreign rule, of protest and struggle, of imprisonment and sacrifice, the moment of freedom has finally arrived. In Delhi, the Constituent Assembly is packed. The air is electric with an almost impossible sense of hope and history. As the clock ticks towards midnight, Jawaharlal Nehru, the man who will be India's first Prime Minister, rises to speak, and he delivers one of the most beautiful and iconic speeches of the 20th century. Long years ago, he begins, his voice ringing with emotion. We made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. It's a moment of pure, soaring poetry. Outside on the streets of Delhi, millions of people have gathered. They are cheering, singing, weeping with joy. All the years of bitterness and struggle seem to melt away in a wave of collective euphoria. This is the image Mountbatten craved, a perfect, triumphant, and peaceful birth. A few hundred miles away in Karachi, the new capital of the new nation of Pakistan, a similar scene is unfolding. Pakistan officially comes into being on August 14th, a day earlier. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the cold, stubborn lawyer who had been told his demand for a separate nation was an impossible dream, now stands as the founder and governor-general of the largest Muslim state on earth. For the millions who believed in the idea of Pakistan, this is a moment of deliverance. It is the culmination of a promise, a dream of a homeland where they would be the masters of their own fate. The celebrations are frantic and heartfelt. A country has been born against all odds. But beneath the soaring speeches and the cheering crowds lies a central, colossal, and completely surreal irony. As the clock strikes midnight and these two great nations, India and Pakistan, officially awake to life and freedom, they do so in a state of profound ignorance. They are nations without shape. They are countries without defined borders. The millions of people celebrating in the streets, now officially citizens of one country or the other, have absolutely no idea where the line separating them actually is. Pakistan has been created, but nobody, not Jinnah, not Nehru, not Mountbatten, can point to an official map and say with certainty, here is where Pakistan begins, and here is where India ends. The map is still locked in the Viceroy's safe. Imagine the two newborn nations as babies in a cosmic delivery room, taking their first breaths. Personified dialogue. Baby India blinks in the new light, wiggling its toes. Wow, I exist. I feel so sovereign. I have a tryst with destiny. This is going to be amazing. Hey Pakistan, you awake over there? Isn't this fantastic? Baby Pakistan looks around nervously. Yes, I'm here. It's certainly novel. But tell me something. Does your left leg feel a bit tingly and uncertain? I can't quite tell where my border with Afghanistan is, and I'm pretty sure my eastern arm is still attached to you somewhere. India. Don't be silly. We're independent nations now. We have flags and everything. Pakistan. We have flags, yes. But do we have a map? I feel like we should have been born with an instruction manual, or at least a clearly labeled diagram. Is Lahore part of my torso or your shoulder? It's all very confusing. India. Relax. The grown-ups said they'd give us the map in a couple of days. I'm sure it will all be fine. This is the schizophrenic reality of that night. Back in the provinces, the stroke of midnight is not a moment of hope. It's a moment of terror. As the Union Jack is lowered for the last time, the flimsy authority of the British Empire vanishes with it. The Punjab boundary force is officially dissolved. The new barely formed police forces of West Punjab, Pakistan, and East Punjab, India, have no control. For a Sikh family in a village that they fear will be in Pakistan, midnight is the moment the last lock on the cage is removed. They are now a defenseless minority at the mercy of a new government and their heavily armed neighbors. The power vacuum is complete. The state of nature has returned. While Nehru is speaking of a nation's soul-finding utterance in Punjab, that utterance is the sharpening of swords and the loading of rifles. Here is the meta-commentary on this bizarre and tragic birth. History has never been so starkly divided against itself. You have two completely contradictory narratives happening at the exact same time. The official story, the one written in the capitals, is a glorious tale of freedom won and destiny achieved. The unofficial story, the one being written in blood in the villages, is a grim tale of fear, abandonment, and the collapse of civilization. It was the best of times and the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom and the age of foolishness. It was the spring of hope and the winter of despair. And all of it was happening at once, under the same midnight sky. The party is over. The last of the fireworks from Independence Day have fizzled out against the night sky. The soaring speeches are now just echoes. For 2 full days, the brand new nations of India and Pakistan have existed in a state of suspended animation, a surreal limbo where they are free but undefined. An eerie, tense quiet has fallen over the subcontinent as 400 million people wait for the other shoe to drop. They are all waiting for the map. On August 17, 1947, 2 days late, the shoe doesn't just drop, it comes crashing through the roof. The Radcliffe Award is finally made public. There is no grand announcement from the Viceroy, no solemn address to the new nations. The details are simply released almost furtively to the press and radio. All across Punjab and Bengal, people rush to the newspaper stands, their hands trembling as they scan the columns of dense text and the crude, hastily printed maps. They search for the name of their district, their town, their village, their home, and as they find their answers, a collective, agonized scream echoes across the land. The reality of the line is a brutal, indiscriminate butchery. It has pleased absolutely no one and has confirmed the worst fears of everyone. In Punjab, the great city of Lahore, the cultural and economic heart of the province with its huge and wealthy Hindu and Sikh populations, is officially awarded to Pakistan. In a flash, over 1 million non-Muslims discover they are on the wrong side of the border, trapped in a country they desperately wanted to avoid. As a bitter consolation prize for India, the Muslim-majority district of Gurdaspur is given to them, a move that Pakistanis immediately and furiously decry as a British Congress conspiracy to ensure India has a land route to the disputed state of Kashmir. In Bengal, the great city of Calcutta and its industrial belt are confirmed to be in India, instantly condemning the new East Pakistan to a future as a rural, impoverished hinterland, cut off from its own economic engine. And in a decision of almost comical cruelty, the Chittagong Hill tracts, an area populated by 97% non-Muslims, mostly Buddhists and other tribes, is handed to Pakistan for no discernible reason whatsoever, sparking a conflict that smolders to this day. The line is a hatchet job. Both sides feel cheated. Both sides feel betrayed. Both sides are incandescent with rage. The agonizing uncertainty of the past weeks is over. It has been replaced by a horrifying, concrete certainty. For millions, the line on the map is a death sentence. The simmering, localized violence of the past few days now erupts into a full-blown inferno. This is the trigger. The private militias, the armed gangs of Sikhs, Hindus, and Muslims, now have their official sanction. The battle lines have been drawn. They now know which villages to burn, which neighborhoods to cleanse, which people to kill. Back in Delhi, Mountbatten receives the news with a practiced aristocratic detachment. Personified dialogue, aide, voice strained, holding a stack of frantic telegrams. Your Excellency, the reports from Punjab are catastrophic. The publication of the award has triggered mass-scale violence. Lahore is on fire. Amritsar is a war zone. The local authorities have no control. They're begging for assistance. Mountbatten, adjusting a photograph of himself with Nehru on his desk. And they shall have it from their new governments. This is precisely why we handed over power. It is up to Prime Minister Nehru and Governor General Jinnah to establish law and order in their own sovereign territories. Our job here is done. Aid. But sir, with all due respect, they have no functional administration in these areas yet. We created this situation by withholding the map. Mountbatten. We created 2 new independent nations, a remarkable achievement. If their citizens choose to behave like savages, that is a reflection on them, not on us. History will see this as the inevitable, if unfortunate, birth pangs of freedom. And with that, the Great Migration begins. For a Hindu family in Lahore, the choice is now gone. There is no more hoping, no more waiting. The official word is out. They are now a tiny, hated minority in the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. The choice is stark. Stay and face what is coming, or abandon everything, your home, your business, your history, your ancestral land, and run for your life. And so they run. And for a Muslim family in Amritsar, the situation is identical. They run. Overnight, the roads and railway lines of northern India become choked with the largest exodus in human history. Millions of people, with only what they can carry on their backs or pile onto a bullock cart, begin a desperate, panicked trek towards what they hope is safety on the right side of that arbitrary line. This is the grim meta-commentary, the moment the final bill for all the previous sins comes due. The rushed timeline that made a careful partition impossible. The appointment of an ignorant chairman who drew a line based on bad data. The cynical decision to keep that line a secret to protect the optics of the getaway. It all culminates here, on the blood-soaked plains of a divided land. This was not an unavoidable tragedy. It was a man-made and entirely predictable catastrophe. The British didn't just fail to prevent a disaster, they actively created the perfect conditions for it to flourish. They didn't just draw a line on a map. They lit a fuse and then sprinted for the exit, making sure to lock the door behind them. The line is drawn. The secret is out. The scream has been screamed. And now the running begins. What followed the announcement of the Radcliffe Line was not a debate, not a protest, but a frantic, desperate, and horrifying stampede for survival. It was one of the largest and fastest mass migrations in the history of the human race, compressed into the space of just a few terrible months. This was the world's worst moving day. Imagine being told that you have to move out of your house. Now, you can only take what you can carry. There are no moving trucks. The roads are filled with people trying to kill you, and your new house is in a place you've never seen. Across a line you can't be sure of, and you have to get there on foot. Now multiply that scenario by about 15 million. That was the reality in the autumn of 1947. Two vast rivers of humanity began to flow across the plains of Punjab and the deltas of Bengal. In one direction, Muslims, who had lived for centuries in what was now officially India, fled towards Pakistan. In the other direction, Hindus and Sikhs, who had just discovered their ancestral homes were in Pakistan, fled towards India. The journey was a descent into a special kind of hell. The lucky ones, or so they thought, crowded onto trains. But these weren't ordinary passenger trains. People were packed inside the carriages so tightly they could barely breathe, while thousands more clung to the roofs, the sides, the couplings, anything they could get a handhold on. These trains would then chug slowly across the new border, right through the heart of the violence. They became rolling targets. The death trains, as they came to be known, became a recurring horror of the partition. A train would leave a station in Pakistan, packed to the gills with fleeing Hindus and Sikhs. It would cross into India and arrive at the station in Amritsar, silent. The soldiers and aid workers who opened the doors would be met with a scene of silent, unimaginable horror. And in retaliation, a train full of Muslims heading the other way would be stopped and given the same treatment. For those not on the trains, there was the road. They walked. In massive, lumbering columns of bullock carts, livestock, and people on foot, called kafilas, that could stretch for dozens of miles. These slow-moving columns were completely vulnerable, easy prey for the armed gangs and militias who roamed the countryside looking for revenge or plunder. The violence was a self-perpetuating engine of hate. News of a massacre of a Muslim kafila in East Punjab would reach West Punjab, sparking a furious retaliatory attack on a Hindu and Sikh column. Every atrocity was a justification for the next one. This is the most heartbreaking part of the whole tragedy. This wasn't a war between disciplined armies following orders. This was a war of neighbors. These were communities that had coexisted for generations, now turning on each other with a savagery that was born of pure terror. The very fabric of society didn't just tear, it was shredded. You can almost imagine the two new, broken halves of Punjab having a grim, cynical conversation across their bleeding border. Personified dialogue. West Punjab, Pakistan. Good morning, East. Just wanted to let you know a train carrying several thousand of your former residents has just departed from Lahore. We wished them Godspeed. East Punjab, India. How very kind of you, West. I too have just sent a train full of your new citizens on its way from Amritsar. Let us both pray for their safe passage. West Punjab. Indeed, although I am hearing some disturbing reports of unrest along the railway line, probably just rumors. East Punjab. What a terrible coincidence. I'm hearing the same thing on my side. It's almost as if creating a situation where millions of terrified, defenseless people have to cross a war zone was a fundamentally flawed plan. Who could have possibly predicted this outcome? And here is the raw, brutal meta-commentary. This was the first and most catastrophic failure of the new independent states of India and Pakistan. On day one of their existence, they failed at the most basic duty of any nation, to protect the lives of their citizens. The British, the architects of the chaos, were gone. Their authority had vanished. The new governments born in the middle of this firestorm were utterly overwhelmed. They had no experienced administrators in the border regions, no loyal police force, no ability to control the monster that had been unleashed. The people were left completely and totally on their own, abandoned by the old masters and failed by the new ones. This was the real price of that rushed, cynical, and carelessly planned independence. And it was paid in full, not by the men who drew the lines, but by the ordinary people who were caught on the wrong side of them. While the plains of Punjab are witnessing the world's worst moving day, a humanitarian catastrophe of epic proportions, the final dramatic episodes of our geopolitical dating show are playing out. The smaller princely states have all been bullied, cajoled, or bribed into choosing a side. But the big ones, the problem children, remain. And none is a bigger, more beautiful, or more disastrously complicated problem than the northern state of Jammu and Kashmir. If the partition was a messy divorce, Kashmir was the stunningly beautiful, incredibly valuable summer house that both parties were willing to go to war over. And they would, repeatedly. Kashmir was the ultimate prize. Geographically, it was a fortress nestled in the Himalayas, bordering not just India and Pakistan, but also Afghanistan and China. Strategically, it was invaluable. And aesthetically, it was, by all accounts, heaven on earth. But its political situation was a perfect, symmetrical nightmare. It was the inverse of most of the other problem states. The vast majority of its population, about 77%, was Muslim. But its ruler, the man who got to make the final decision, was a Hindu, Maharaja Hari Singh. This created the Kashmir conundrum. By the logic of population that created Pakistan, it should go to Pakistan. But by the logic of the accession process where the ruler decides, it could just as easily go to India. The man at the center of this storm, Maharaja Hari Singh, was a character straight out of a tragicomedy. He was the ultimate contestant who, upon reaching the final round of the dating show, decides he doesn't actually want to marry either suitor. His dream was for a third option, independence. He envisioned a sovereign, neutral Kashmir, a Switzerland of the East, where he could continue to rule as an absolute monarch, playing the two new behemoths of India and Pakistan against each other. So, as the August 15th deadline came and went, he did nothing. He dithered. He delayed. He refused to choose, hoping to wait out the chaos and emerge with his kingdom intact. This policy of masterly indecision would prove to be his fatal mistake. Pakistan, understandably, was getting extremely antsy. They saw a Muslim majority state on their northern border, a state they considered essential to their identity and security, being held hostage by a Hindu ruler who was clearly stalling. They suspected he was secretly negotiating with India. So, in October 1947, their patience finally ran out. An invasion was launched. To maintain plausible deniability, it wasn't the official Pakistani army, at least not at first. It was a massive force of several thousand Pashtun tribesmen, a Lashkar from the wild northwest frontier. They were well-armed, battle-hardened, and unofficially they were supplied, organized, and led by officers of the Pakistani military. They poured across the border, overwhelming the Maharaja's small and ineffective state army, and began a rapid, violent advance towards the capital, Srinagar. The Maharaja's dream of a glamorous, independent Switzerland of the East evaporated overnight. His army was collapsing. The invaders were burning and looting their way towards his palace, and his kingdom was about to be conquered. He panicked, and he made the most frantic, desperate phone call of his life. Personified dialogue, Maharaja. Hari Singh. On a crackly phone line, sound of distant gunfire. Hello? Delhi? Is Lord Mountbatten there, or Mr. Nehru? Anyone? It's Hari Singh. Yes, that Hari Singh. The one who's been leaving all your letters on read for the past 3 months. Look, I'm terribly sorry to bother you, but a slight geopolitical complication has arisen. My kingdom is in the process of being violently redecorated by several thousand heavily armed gentlemen from Pakistan. My army appears to have taken an unscheduled holiday. I am in desperate, immediate need of military assistance. Name your price. India. A calm, collected voice. "We would love to help, Your Highness, but we can't very well send the Indian Army into what is, legally speaking, a foreign country. That would be an act of war. However, if Kashmir were to become, say, a part of India, then it would be our sovereign duty to defend our own territory. We have a document here, an instrument of accession. It just needs a little signature." He was trapped. With the tribal army just miles from his capital, the Maharaja signed the paper. On October 26, 1947, Kashmir officially acceded to India. The ink was barely dry before Indian troops were being airlifted into Srinagar. They landed at the city's airfield in the nick of time, halting the invaders' advance just outside the capital. The Pakistani army, its plausible deniability now shredded, officially entered the conflict. The First Indo-Pakistani War had begun. The war raged for over a year until a UN-brokered ceasefire was finally called. The ceasefire line, known as the Line of Control, left the state divided. India was left in control of roughly 2/3 of the territory, including the prized Kashmir Valley, Jammu and Ladakh. Pakistan was left with the remaining third, which they called Azad, Free Kashmir. And this, right here, is the meta-commentary. This is the origin story of the forever conflict. The messy, ambiguous, and violent birth of a divided Kashmir became the central, defining feature of the rivalry between India and Pakistan. It was the poison pill left behind by the departing British, a problem so perfectly constructed to be unsolvable that it has fueled 3 major wars and a perpetual state of hostility ever since. The Maharaja's indecision, Pakistan's aggression, and India's legalistic opportunism all conspired to create a geopolitical wound that has never healed. It's the permanent, ugly custody battle at the heart of a historically messy divorce. While the frozen tragedy of Kashmir is beginning its long, cold winter in the mountains of the north, we must now turn our attention south, to the very heart of the Indian peninsula. For here, another of our star contestants from the great princely state dating show is having a full-blown diva-level meltdown and refusing to accept that the show is over. This is the story of Hyderabad, a state so wealthy, so powerful, and so strategically located that it thought it could ignore the new rules of the game. It was a fatal miscalculation. Hyderabad was not just another princely state. It was a behemoth. A kingdom the size of France with a population of 16 million people, its own currency, and its own army. And it sat right in the geographic belly of the new nation of India. It was a massive sovereign island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And its ruler, the Nizam, was not just any monarch. He was, by most estimates, the single richest human being on the face of the planet. The stories of his wealth are the stuff of legend. This was a man who allegedly used the Jacob diamond, a flawless gem the size of a chicken's egg, as a simple paperweight. His palaces contained rooms literally filled with gold bars, pearls, and precious stones. He had so much currency that it was said to be rotting in the basements nibbled on by rats. Like our other problem children, Hyderabad had a fatal demographic mismatch. The Nizam was a Muslim, the heir to a dynasty that had ruled for centuries. But his subjects, the 16 million people of Hyderabad, were over 85% Hindu. With this in mind, the Nizam, fueled by his colossal wealth and an equally colossal ego, decided to follow the path of glorious independence. He looked at India and Pakistan and thought, why should I be a supporting actor in their show when I can be the star of my own? He refused to accede to either country, dreaming of a sovereign Hyderabad, a third power on the subcontinent, a royal kingdom that would stand as a testament to his own glory. He began to act the part, trying to get international recognition from the UN and cozying up to Pakistan for support. More dangerously, he allowed a fanatical, extremist private militia of conservative Muslims, known as the Razakars, to run rampant. These armed gangs terrorized the Hindu majority, their leader giving inflammatory speeches about how the waters of the Bay of Bengal would soon wash the feet of their king. This was not a situation India could tolerate. The new Indian government, particularly the iron-willed Deputy Prime Minister Vallabhbhai Patel, looked at an independent, hostile and potentially Pakistan-aligned state in the middle of their country and saw, in his words, a cancer in the belly of India. For over a year, from August 1947 to September 1948, India tried to negotiate. Patel A.'s offer was the same one made to all the other princes. You can keep your titles, your palaces, and your obscene wealth. We'll even give you a fat, tax-free pension. Just sign the damn paper and let us run the country. But the Nizam, convinced of his own importance and egged on by the extremists, refused. Personified dialogue. Vallabhbhai Patel for India. On the phone, his voice a low rumble of infinite patience stretched to its limit. Your Exalted Highness, we have been discussing this for a year. Your position is untenable. You are a landlocked island. Your people wish to be part of India. Sign the instrument of accession. It is your only logical move. The Nizam, through an aide. The Nizam finds your term logical to be insulting to his divinely ordained sovereignty. The Razakars are strong. We are buying weapons from Europe. We have filed a complaint with the UN Security Council. You would not dare invade us. The world is watching. Patel sighs, the sound of a glacier cracking. The world is watching, is it? Very well. Then we shall put on a show. We have exhausted all diplomatic options. Please inform His Exalted Highness that the Indian government has decided to send in some police to help him with his internal security problems. We trust he will not object to us restoring a bit of law and order. In September of 1948, India's patience officially ran out. The Indian Army was ordered to invade, but in a stroke of public relations genius, it wasn't called an invasion. It was called Operation Polo, and it was officially designated a police action. The stated goal wasn't to conquer Hyderabad, but to restore order and disband the extremist Razakars. It was perhaps the most polite and understated term for a full-scale military invasion in history. The war itself lasted 5 days. It was a complete and utter mismatch. The modern, battle-hardened Indian Army versus the Nizam's largely ceremonial military, and the fanatical but poorly equipped Razakars. It was like a professional football team taking on a high school drama club. The Nizam's forces folded almost immediately. Hyderabad was swiftly conquered, the Razakars were crushed, and the state was forcibly integrated into the Indian Union. The Nizam, his grand dream of sovereignty in tatters, was forced to sign. His reign was over. The meta-commentary here is about the brutal pragmatism of the new Indian state. The story of Hyderabad was the final brutal curtain call for the age of princely romance. The new nation-states of the subcontinent were not sentimental. They were playing for keeps. India, under the steely leadership of Patel, demonstrated that while it might talk the talk of Gandhi and non-violence, it would not hesitate to use overwhelming military force to secure its territorial integrity. It was a clear, unambiguous message. The dating show was over, the map was drawn, and any attempt to challenge it would be met not with negotiation, but with the army. The map of the subcontinent has been violently redrawn. The princely states have been, for the most part, absorbed through a combination of sweet-talking and strong arming. The fires of the Great Migration are still raging, but the new political reality is set in stone. The British Raj is officially over. The British are gone. Right? Well, about that. In one of the most bizarre, awkward, and frankly weird postscripts in the history of decolonization, the British didn't quite leave, or at least, their most famous representative didn't. First, a quick, boring but necessary bit of constitutional law. When India and Pakistan became independent on August 15th, they didn't immediately become the republics they are today. For a transitional period, they were dominions. This is a fancy Commonwealth term which basically means they were independent countries, but their official head of state was still the British king, and the king's on-the-ground representative, his constitutional stand-in for ceremonies and signing things, was a figure called the Governor-General. Now Lord Mountbatten, a man whose ego had its own gravitational pull, had a grand vision for his role in this new era. He proposed that he, in all his magnificent glory, should stay on as a common Governor-General for both India and Pakistan. He saw himself as a neutral fatherly figure, a respected umpire who could help the two newborn squabbling nations sort out their differences in the early days. He would be the wise, impartial chairman of the board for the subcontinent. The Indian leadership, particularly Nehru, who was still fully under the spell of Mountbatten's charm, thought this was a splendid idea. a symbol of continuity, a steady hand on the tiller during a turbulent time. They formally invited Mountbatten to be India's first Governor-General. Mountbatten, preening, then took this proposal to Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He strode into the meeting expecting the leader of Pakistan to be grateful for this generous offer from the king's cousin. He was, after all, offering his own magnificent self to help guide Jinnah's new fledgling state. Jinnah, the man who had never once fallen for Mountbatten's charm, the man whose entire life's work was the creation of a truly sovereign Muslim state, free from any hint of Hindu or British domination, looked at this proposal with the kind of disdain he usually reserved for a poorly written legal brief. His answer was a swift, unequivocal, and deeply satisfying "No, thank you." Pakistan was a free country. Pakistan would have a Pakistani as its head of state, and that Pakistani would be him, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Mountbatten was reportedly stunned. He was personally deeply offended. He couldn't comprehend that Jinnah would reject him. This personal slight, this bruising of his colossal ego, would color his attitude towards Pakistan for the rest of his tenure. So this led to the single most awkward political arrangement imaginable. On August 15, 1947, the new nation of Pakistan was headed by its own founder, Governor-General Jinnah. Makes sense. But the new nation of India, a country that had just spent the better part of a century engaged in a titanic struggle to throw off the yoke of British imperialism, was now being voluntarily led by the last British viceroy. The man who was the living embodiment of the empire they had just kicked out was invited to stay on as their constitutional head of state. It was the political equivalent of finalizing a bitter, messy divorce, and then immediately asking your ex-spouse's incredibly arrogant lawyer to move in as your new roommate. Imagine the first diplomatic cocktail party between the two new nations. Personified dialogue Pakistan sips its drink looking stiff and formal. "Ah, India. Good to see you. I trust you're settling into your new arrangements." India, beaming a little too brightly. "Oh, splendidly. It's all terribly exciting. And Dickie, Lord Mountbatten that is, has been an absolute godsend. Such a help with the transition. He has so much experience, you see." Pakistan raises an eyebrow. "You mean the man who just rushed the job, botched the borders, and left the house on fire? You've kept him on as, what? A consultant?" India, Governor-General. "It's a very important constitutional role. It shows continuity. And besides, he and Jawahar get on so well. It's a symbol of our new friendship with Britain." Pakistan. "I see. My symbol of independence was putting the founder of my nation in charge of my nation, but keeping the old boss around is certainly a choice. Does he still expect you to make him tea?" This wasn't just an awkward look. It had real consequences. When the Kashmir conflict exploded in October 1947, who was the head of state in Delhi, sitting in on the defense meetings and advising the Indian cabinet? Lord Mountbatten. Pakistan screamed blue murder. They saw it as proof of a conspiracy, that the last viceroy was now actively helping India steal a Muslim-majority state. It created a perception of bias that was impossible to shake, and that's our meta-commentary. This bizarre episode reveals the deeply complex psychology of the end of empire. For Pakistan, the break had to be absolute and total. For India, the relationship with its former master was more complicated. The decision to keep Mountbatten was part pragmatism, part hero worship on Nehru's part, and part a desire to prove that India was magnanimous in victory. But it was a politically clumsy move that, in the most critical months of the new nation's lives, made the British Empire look like he was wearing an Indian jersey. By the middle of 1948, the bizarre postscript to the British Raj is finally over. Lord Mountbatten, his tour of duty as India's first but also last imperial head of state complete, packs up his ceremonial uniforms and heads home to a hero's welcome. Earlier that year, in a quiet, somber ceremony, the last battalion of British troops had marched through the Grand Gateway of India in Bombay, the very monument built to commemorate the arrival of a British monarch, and boarded the ships that would take them home for good. The sight of the Somerset Light Infantry, their rifles on their shoulders, disappearing into the morning mist of the Arabian Sea, was the final definitive full stop on a 200-year-long sentence of imperial rule. The British were finally truly gone. And as their ships sailed over the horizon, what did they see when they looked back in the rearview mirror? Did they see the smoke still rising from the villages of Punjab? Did they see the endless columns of refugees still trudging across the scorched earth? Did they see the two new nations they had created, already locked in a bitter war over Kashmir? No, of course not. They saw a job well done. Back in London, the narrative spun by Clement Attlee's government and loudly championed by the ever-photogenic Mountbatten was one of resounding success. They had, after all, fulfilled their promise. They had given India its freedom. The mission was accomplished. The transfer of power had been achieved. The fact that this transfer had been accompanied by the deaths of up to 2 million people and the displacement of 15 million more was seen as a tragic but ultimately unavoidable footnote. The violence, in the official British telling of the story, was not their fault. It was the result of ancient, intractable, and frankly rather savage religious hatreds between the Indians themselves. The British had simply been the noble, long-suffering policemen who had tried their best to keep the peace between these perpetually squabbling natives. And now that the police had left the neighborhood, well, what can you do if the residents decide to burn the whole place down? It was a narrative of magnificent, almost heroic self-absolution. Britain was not the arsonist. It was the exhausted firefighter who had finally given up and gone home. They saw themselves as the magnanimous decolonizer, the enlightened empire that knew when it was time to leave, and they had done so with grace and dignity. They patted themselves on the back for a peaceful and orderly withdrawal, a phrase that could only be uttered by someone who had never set foot in a refugee camp in Amritsar or seen the inside of a death train in Lahore. Imagine a final exit interview between history and a personified Great Britain as it dusts off its hands on the docks at Southampton. Personified dialogue history. Well, Britain, that's a wrap on 200 years in India, a rather dramatic final act. Any closing thoughts? Britain, adjusting its tie, looking terribly pleased with itself. A smashing success, all in all. We took a chaotic mess of feudal kingdoms and gave them railways, the rule of law, and a love for cricket. And then, when the time was right, we gracefully handed them the keys to their own freedom. A textbook case of responsible decolonization. History. And the unpleasantness? The 1 million+ dead, the largest refugee crisis in human history, the permanent state of war you've created. Britain. Tragic, of course. Terribly tragic. But that's not on us. We drew a perfectly sensible line based on a judicial review. If the locals chose to react with such enthusiasm, well, that speaks to their temperament, not our planning. You can't blame the referee if the players decide to stab each other after the match. We did our part. A job well done. History. You do realize you're the one who sold them the knives, right? Britain. Details. Mustn't get bogged down. The important thing is the chapter is closed. Now, what's next on the agenda? Ah yes, Palestine. I'm sure that will be much more straightforward. And this is the final galling meta-commentary on the British role in this entire fiasco. They never, ever took responsibility. For decades, the story of partition in Britain has been framed as an Indian tragedy, a self-inflicted wound born of their own divisions. But that is a profound and deliberate misreading of the past. The British didn't just stumble into a chaotic situation. They actively cultivated it for a century, with their policies of divide and rule, playing one community against the other to maintain their own power. And when it was no longer profitable to stay, they didn't manage a peaceful transition. They engineered a panicked, irresponsible scuttle. The fire that consumed India in 1947 may have burned with the fuel of local hatreds, but the British were the ones who spent 100 years soaking the entire subcontinent in gasoline. Their final act was to light a match, whistle a cheerful tune, and walk away. To call it a job well done is not just a historical inaccuracy, it's a moral obscenity. The British ships have disappeared over the horizon. The last viceroy has flown home. The story is over for them. But for the two new, traumatized nations left behind, the story is just beginning. India and Pakistan are now masters of their own destiny, a destiny that begins in a landscape of almost unimaginable horror. They are born into a world of fire and blood, facing a series of crises that would overwhelm even the most stable, established nations. Their first task is to deal with a humanitarian catastrophe that is almost biblical in scale. From both sides of the new border, millions of refugees are pouring in. They are starving, sick, and have lost everything except the clothes on their backs and the traumatic memories of what they have just survived. The brand new, inexperienced governments of India and Pakistan have to somehow find a way to feed house and resettle a population the size of a large European country, all while their national treasuries are empty and their administrative machinery is in a state of near total collapse. It is the most difficult start to life a new nation could possibly have. But the physical scars of partition, as terrible as they were, would eventually begin to heal. It is the psychological wounds that would prove to be permanent. The creation of the border was not a neat surgical separation. It was a brutal forced cleansing. The rich, multicultural, and intertwined societies of Punjab and Bengal were effectively destroyed forever. Cities like Lahore, once a vibrant mix of Muslim, Hindu, and Sikh culture, became almost monolithically Muslim. Across the border, Amritsar became almost entirely Hindu and Sikh. The other was gone, violently expelled, and in its place grew a hard, suspicious, and unforgiving sense of monolithic national identity. This created the toxic bedrock of the India-Pakistan relationship. It was a rivalry born not of normal geopolitical competition, but of the trauma of a shared bloody birth. Pakistan, the smaller nation, defined its entire identity in opposition to India. Born with a deep-seated fear of being dominated and a burning sense of grievance over the moth-eaten state it had received, especially the loss of Kashmir. India, the larger nation which had never wanted the divorce in the first place, was left with a permanent sense of frustrated bitterness, viewing Pakistan as an illegitimate, artificial state carved from its own body. This mutual suspicion became the default setting for all their future interactions. Imagine them as two teenagers decades later, still locked in the same argument they were having on day one. Personified dialogue. India. You know, this constant military buildup is really unproductive. We could be focusing on economic development. Pakistan. Oh, that's easy for you to say. You're 10 times my size. You'd swallow me whole if I let my guard down for a second. And besides, we wouldn't need all these soldiers if you'd just resolved the Kashmir issue. India. Kashmir is an integral part of our country, and that is non-negotiable. The issue would have been resolved in 1947 if you hadn't invaded. Pakistan. We had to support the people's right to choose. A right you've been denying them ever since. You're the aggressor, India. Me? You're the one who keeps starting wars. Pakistan. Only to liberate our brothers. And so on, forever and ever. Amen. And so the cycle continued. The unresolved argument over Kashmir led to a major war in 1965. The economic and cultural disconnect between West and East Pakistan, a direct result of the nonsensical Bengal partition, led to a brutal civil war in 1971, in which India intervened, leading to another Indo-Pakistani war and the birth of Bangladesh. In the 1990s, their rivalry went nuclear, making the subcontinent arguably the most dangerous place on the planet. The line Sir Cyril Radcliffe drew in 5 weeks has become one of the most heavily militarized and hostile borders in the world. And that is the messy, lingering aftermath. Our final meta-commentary is this. The story of partition is not a story that has an ending. It is a ghost that still haunts the present. The breakup of British India was never a clean one. The lines were drawn all wrong, and the exes were doomed to live next door to each other, in houses built on a foundation of shared trauma, forever arguing over a fence made of blood and mistrust. It stands as the ultimate devastating lesson in what happens when men in a hurry, armed with bad maps and an abundance of confidence, decide to draw lines on a map without any thought for the millions of human lives that will be caught and crushed between them. And so, Britain sailed away, having successfully turned their biggest colonial headache into someone else's permanent, multi-generational migraine. Honestly, a truly masterful act of imperial buck-passing. Now, before you go and cite this podcast in your history thesis, Please remember that this was a highly simplified, deeply sarcastic, and probably legally actionable retelling of incredibly complex events. We skipped over nuances, glossed over tragedies, and personified nations in a way that would make any serious academic weep. But hopefully, it was a bit more entertaining than a textbook. If you enjoyed this particular historical train wreck, please let us know in the comments what other baffling, absurd, and poorly managed moment in history you'd like us to tackle next. We're always looking for new ways to prove that the past was just as ridiculous as the present, and that's how that whole mess went down. Until next time, don't invade Russia in the winter.